Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel. You're watching TechStrong TV, and happy Monday to you. Today is Monday, August 24th, a new week, last week of the month. Where it is kind of the last week in summer for a lot of us. Usually, with the beginning of September comes fall, school, and everything else. Who knows what it'll be this year with COVID and everything. But we just keep doing what we're doing. Let me quickly go through what we've got in store for you today here on TechStrong TV. First of all, we have an interview with James Isaacs, CEO of Cyara, and we're going to talk a little bit about shifting testing right. We spend a lot of time and emphasis on shift left, but what about shifting testing right? James and I are going to talk about that. Then I'm really happy to introduce a new company to you. I met with their CEO and founder, Darshan Rawal, and the company is Acima, and they are still based out in Silicon Valley, and they think they have a better mousetrap here. It's called BIOS, and it brings together, it's a platform that brings together a lot of disparate pieces. I'm going to let Darshan tell you about it. We're going to have a good interview there. And then from the company Mabel, if you're familiar with Mabel, a testing company, I have Daryl Ferris, who heads up their solution engineers. And Daryl and I had a good talk about testing and DevOps. And, Daryl says DevOps is the hottest thing in testing, and testing is the hottest thing in DevOps. We'll explore that with him. Looking forward to it. And then we're going to go to something old. And for something old, we'll go back to TechStrong TV, or TechStrong Con, excuse me, our seems so long ago, it was just 2 months ago. Actually, almost 3 months ago. TechStrong Con, our last virtual event we did. And we have Nanak Afif from New Relic, who presented there on serverless and empowering remote teams. So it's great presentation. Then we have, I'll be back with the news. Then turn things over to Charlene O'Hanlon, who has a great interview today, understanding the concept of zero trust in cloud, and also a good preview of webinars this week on MediaOps.com. And then we have an interview from Mitch Ashley about, when life throws you lemons, how to make lemonade, and looking at experiences from back during 9/11 and then in 2008. And how that relates to today. Good stuff there, as usual, from Mitch. Mitch also has a good interview with Tracy Reagan, CEO of Deploy Hub, board member of CDF. And then I'll be back to wrap things up. Sounds like it's a great Monday here on TechStrong TV. We're going to take a commercial and be right back. We spend a lot of time thinking about shifting testing left, shifting security left. So much emphasis in DevOps on shift left. And one of the things that I've seen kind of rise up over the last year is, for every action, there's a reaction. And that here is shift right. In this interview, I meet with CEO of Cyara, James Isaac, about shifting testing right. Here now's my interview.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, this is Alan Schimmel, and thanks for joining us on another episode of TechStrong TV. My episode in this segment is James Isaacs, of Cyara. James, welcome to TechStrong TV. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me here.
All right. So as your background there says, Cyara looks like they have I'm going to guess it's a virtual event this year, September 15th to 16th. And we'll invite people to go check that out, and you can tell us more about that. But before we do, James, you haven't been on TechStrong TV, and we've been doing it now. Well, we're into our 80-something episode here. 80th something episode. So we've been doing it a while. But our audience may not be familiar with the company. Why don't you give us a little background, and if you don't mind, a little of your background?
Sure, no, I'd be delighted to. So Ciara is a company that has a platform for the customer experience assurance arena. So what we do is we help companies automate testing and check every single avenue of all of their customer support systems, the IVR, SMS, web chat, et cetera, make sure all of it's working well. And I've been with the company closing in on 4 years. It's been an absolute blast. This is my 5th company building experience. I've been blessed. I've been lucky. Had some great teams, but this is absolutely the best.
Great. And before we jump into testing everything, tell us a little bit about Exchange.
So sure. So as you can see from my background, we have an event, CR Exchange. The 2 previous years, we did it physical and in person in San Francisco, and 100 customers flew in from around the world. And we call it Exchange because it's all about the exchange of ideas. And about 90% of the presentations are customer led. It's not us, CR, talking, it's the customers really describing how are they embracing DevOps, how are they embracing, doing a better job around embedding quality throughout the software development lifecycle. Customers love it because it's not us talking, it's them sharing great ideas. Of course, this year, travel prohibition, so we're doing the whole thing virtually and embracing that. We think it's going to be a terrific event, again, with maybe even broader reach because folks won't have to fly. They can dip in for an hour or 2.
Absolutely. We put on a bunch of virtual events here at MediaOps, DevOps.com, and Security Boulevard Container Journal. And one of the things we see is, first of all, it makes no sense doing a geographic event anymore because every event is now global, right? So, for instance, we're co-producing the DevOps India Summit, which used to, in years past when it was physical, would be the largest attended DevOps-only event in India. And now that it's virtual, other than the fact that it's on Indian time, which is a little bit out of the way for, let's say, most of us in the U.S.,
Yep.
They have 3 or 4x the amount of attendees registered than they did when it was physical. We're seeing it all over the place. So if there's a silver lining, like there's ever a silver lining in this COVID mess, it's that, I wouldn't be surprised if you have 2-3x. You had 100 customers before, you liable to have 2-3 times that easily.
Absolutely.
Participating.
Absolutely what we're aiming for. And also some breadth. So, some folks can't get travel approval to go to an event, maybe where they are within the organization. It's hard to justify. Now, folks who might embrace this almost as career development. Gee, I'd like to learn more about DevOps. I'd like to learn more about how you embed quality.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
We see that also. Number one, I think this manifests itself, James, that going forward in years ahead, I think physical events are going to have a virtual element to them. So they'll be sort of hybrid for that reason, number one. Number two, I think with virtual events I learned this from my team when we were doing an event. It was multi-track. I said, well, how come we don't have different rooms, different virtual rooms for the... Well, it doesn't make a difference because you all go in one room. You just pick what track you're on. So it's much easier to diversify. I think training and learning is absolutely part of the mix. I'm a co-founder of the DevOps Institute, and they do monthly these things called skill up days. And they pick this month it's observability. I think last month was SRE, whatever. It's a tremendous way to do learning. So you're right. It's not a strange new world. It's a different world than we had before, and I don't think anything's ever going to be the same, whether we put this COVID thing in the rearview mirror or not, right?
No, I think you're right. What you're highlighting is it's almost democratizing access to this because we're forced to put it out there
Yep.
and virtual. So what's going to happen? A lot more people are going to have access to it, and there's going to be some positive dividends that come from it. Absolutely.
Sure. And that's good. You try to find the positive in all this heartache and grief. Anyway, James, let's talk a little about continuous testing, about automated testing. You know, it's funny. I'm doing a roundtable tomorrow. We do this regular show called DevOps Unbound, then once a month we do a roundtable on it. And tomorrow's subject is called Dev Everything Ops, right? Because though DevOps started DevOps,
Right.
rather, not, I don't want to say quickly, but over the last 5 years, we've seen DevSecOps, DevTestOps, DevBizOps, DevThisOps. It's Dev every, so taking the kind of DevOps mentality and applying it,
Right.
across. Let's talk DevTestOps a little bit with you. What do you think that means, and how's it manifesting itself?
Well, no, it's interesting. We definitely see it. It was the kind of crystallizing moment for me. It was about a year and a half ago when we had physical exchange, not the virtual one we just talked about. And a guy got up. We did this in Hartford. Guy got up and said his CEO of his big insurance company had dictated everybody's going to learn scaled agile framework. Everybody's going to embrace this. We're going full on DevOps. And so it was sort of like it's arrived. And what we see in our particular business is that people are now starting to embrace end-to-end quality. And the work we've done with our platform to be able to, as you design the experience in the IVR, SMS, chatbot, you can create the test script, do the functional testing, the regression testing, the big load test, and then monitor it. And so that's just become part of, I would say, the DevOps phenomena. And you almost can't get to Agile and DevOps without automation. It's almost impossible physically. And so we've seen this, that people are now starting to talk about a Dev Test Ops as like a subcomponent to look at and make sure every element in your customer support, customer experience framework is covered by this. So almost as if the whole surface area of the customer experience is covered.
Absolutely. I'll tell you something else, back to the COVID, not to dwell on it, but in these unusual times where we have so much of the dev team, the DevOps team, the test team, everybody's remote, right? No one's in an office working together. The more you can automate, right, and kind of, it's almost the better off you are. I think in general, the more you automate, the better off you are, right? If you can automate it, because, and this is counterintuitive, but I think it goes to the core of DevOps. When you automate, you could go faster, but with better quality.
No, it's so true. It's funny. So I've been at this for a while, and I kind of grew up in product management, and it was cost, or I would say quality and speed, they were in an inverse relationship.
Absolutely.
If you wanted speed in development, you sacrifice quality. And so it's interesting, if you live long enough and, participate in the business long enough, that's not true.
Yeah, you and me both.
Yeah. And there was always, an inverse relationship or is mutually exclusive. What's interesting to see now, again, with kind of this DevOps and Dev Test Ops, you can get to higher speed with higher quality. And it's as if we've kind of, bent the laws of physics a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's like a grand unification theory, because I'll tell you what else. My background's security, InfoSec. If you go faster and automate stuff, you get part of that better quality is better security.
Right.
Which again is kind of, sacrilegious to my friends in the security world, because we just like, we've also always preached, got to go slow. Got to go slow. We got to make sure it's secure, right? But when you are moving at that speed and automating in a quality way, you can build that security into the process. It doesn't have to be bolted on out here, right? It gets built in, stuff is checked. When code is checked in, it's checked again, as part of your CI/CD process, and it's hopefully continuously checked, post. And so you can have it all, right? Which is, hey, who doesn't want it all, right? But it's good stuff.
interesting that, so about 80% of our new customers, that is a new logo that joins the CRA Nation, as it were, 80% of them have not embraced any automation. We're the first time they have. Now, they may have automation in other parts of their shop, but not in the customer support systems. So one of the most common things that we hear is after, usually the time to value is under 90 days with us. You can get going. Exhaustion doing manual testing, and they might get 3 to 5% of the actual surface area of the experience. And now with CRA in place, it's punch a button, 15 minutes, regresses the whole code base. They go get coffee and they come back, and if there's a problem, they go fix it. If it's ready to go, they're free to ship it. And so one of the things I notice also, and one of the most gratifying things about the job, it's more the mid-level people at these customers. They say to me, I get to go home now, as opposed to a 48-hour manual testing, frankly, error-ridden, kind of exercise. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of benefits, because what happens is your people in your IT shop, they're almost drifting upwards, if you will, professionally. They're doing higher bit order, kind of problem solving, et cetera. So there's a lot of benefits besides the quality pieces that we were just talking about a moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny because I remember when I first started DevOps.com, right? A lot of the QA tester folks were like, oh, this could be the end of testing. It threatens my job security. I haven't seen one tester get fired or be replaced. We've automated you out of existence. It doesn't work like that.
No,
right?
It's actually,
there's always some good, it helps them.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, I mean,
No.
what we've noticed is that pretty much people keep the same level of headcount, pretty much, but that frees them up to do higher bid order tasks. Now, if they're not, willing or, able to embrace that, that could be a career problem. But most of the people, they're less exhausted. They're working on higher order problems, and it's good for everybody.
More valuable. All right, James, I want to pivot a little bit because we're running a little low on time, and there was something else I wanted to hit on. So sometimes, processes, frameworks can be victims of their own success. In DevOps, there's been a huge emphasis on what we call shift left, right? We've shifted security left. I referenced it, right? We're now doing security when we're putting code in Git and in the CI/CD process, and we're shifting testing. One of the things is we've got devs now kicking off automated testing scripts and stuff like that. We're shifting it left. So much of the ops where we shifted left, right? But there comes a point, where you ask the question is, can you shift too far left? Can you shift too much left? And every action demands an equal reaction, right? Should we also be shifting right with some things where it makes sense to ensure things are going smoothly? So shift right. What's your thoughts there?
So our thoughts are that you should be completely integrated from one end to the other. So in the design process, if you can create the test script, and with our CR platform, we're able to do that at the inception point. Again, catching a bug or a defect prior to getting into production, way cheaper, obviously. So that's absolutely a good thing. But here's what we've noticed, as the dividend is, create the test script, functional test, regression test, load test. Now you're ready to go into production. Use that exact same test script and methodology to test in operations. Because then what happens is that you're monitoring what you originally designed. And if you think about, again, when I think about when I first got into the industry, you design something, get tested, go into operations, and then there are a whole different set of, sort of monitoring tools, if you will, to check on how things are going. Wouldn't it be great if you could just actually monitor in the operations end of things exactly what you originally designed? And so if anything, you've made the IT ops people's job way easier. And so we definitely I would say our our most practiced customers, that is exactly what they do. And I think the whole move to the left initiative and effort was really, if you catch a bug or a defect early on, costs way less to the organization. So now what we're discovering is that, well, production environments change. Somebody can change a router, somebody can change the settings, somebody can change a configuration. And then if you're actually monitoring what you originally designed and shipped, you can see that instantly and fix it. And so definitely seeing that in our most practiced and able customers.
Excellent. And but I also think it speaks to another piece of this, James, and that's that, look, yes, it's much cheaper to fix them on this side, right? The further left. I've seen numbers from 6x, 7x, 10x and above, right? But I think part of it, and again, a lesson we learned in security, you can't put all your money into preventing a breach. You've got to put aside some money in how to respond to a breach.
Exactly.
So you can't put all of your efforts into testing and everything, pre-deployment, if you will, right? Because stuff happens, the world changes, software changes, new vulnerabilities happen, new hardwares. Stuff happens after just because you ship software, the world doesn't freeze at that point in time. And so you need to be looking at what you are running in the environment today, not in the shipping environment or as it existed when you deployed. And I think sometimes we forget that whole piece of it. Right now, if you're an SRE person, right, responsible in operations and site reliability and so forth, you recognize that. But when we look at the testing world and testers and so forth, I don't know if they recognize that.
Yeah, it's funny you said, because again, I would say our best customers, what they're using with the shift right is they're getting very close to the point of, I'll call it automated monitoring and remediation and repair. Meaning, again, the same idea, like you created this test script at the outset, the design phase, walked all the way through, using the same test script, you are monitoring what you originally designed. But then if a problem develops, if you'd like to roll back to the preceding software version, when you shift all the way to the right, you have the opportunity to begin almost an automated remediation type of scenario. And that's probably beyond what I would say the original, either intentions or thought patterns were, around a QA or testing, kind of mentality. But we're starting to see that, again, in our most practiced, most high performing customers. And that's at a different level.
Excellent. Good stuff there. James, we're about out of time. You know what? We never told people, if they want to find out more, where can they go?
Well, if you want to hear both, customer case stories of some of our customers who are proud of their successes, you can go to www.ciara.com. And of course, if you want to register for Ciara Exchange, you can go there as well. And we hope to see you there.
And that's CYARA.
Correct.
Well, it's on your background. They could actually see it there. Sometimes, I have that radio mentality on TV. Who knows? Anyway, hey, James Isaacs, thanks for joining us on TechStrong TV. Appreciate the conversation. That's Ciara Exchange, September 15th, 16th. It's a virtual event. Sounds like it's going to be good. Check it out. James, come back and visit us soon.
I would be delighted to do so. Thanks for having me here, Alan.
All righty. Hey, this is Alan Schimmel, TechStrong TV. We're going to be right back with our next guest. Our next segment today features Darshan Rawal. Darshan is the founder of Isima, a new company out of Silicon Valley that has some really interesting technology. And, I always say that I never met a successful entrepreneur that didn't think somehow their company was going to change the world. And Darshan is no exception. After many years at Silicon Valley, in the tech world, they believe him and his team believes Isima is really a game changer. I'm going to let him tell you why. Here's my interview with Darshan Rawal.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another segment here for TechStrong TV. I want to introduce a new company to our community. It's a pretty new company all around, or a new service and product, and I'd like to introduce them to you. Actually, I'm going to have their CEO introduce them to you. First, I want to introduce you here to Darshan Rawal, and if I mispronounce it, Darshan, please correct me. Don't feel funny. Darshan, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thank you, Alan, for having me on the show.
It's our pleasure. So, Darshan, the company's name is Isima. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's
okay. And you know what? Rather than me stumbling through mispronouncing all of these names and doing my best, I'm going to throw it at you. And Darshan, do me a favor. Introduce yourself and your company to our audience.
Thank you so much, Alan. Yeah, I'll do. So the company is Isima. It means imagination in Lord of the Rings Elvish language. We are reimagining data management for the last 3 decades, and our offering is BIOS. It's a business intelligence operating system. And our vision is that for 3 decades, data management has been very fragmented. We just keep on building better and better versions of ETL, ESBs, enterprise data warehouses, and BI. And enterprises are gluing these technologies together, and it has just gotten worse over the last 3 decades. And we thought to hyperconverge all of these things into a single system so that enterprise can build their own data-driven outcomes. And we strongly believe that enterprises should own their own IP rather than outsourcing it to cloud and open source and everything else. So that's what the company is about. The product's goal is that a single data analyst can make data products live in a matter of weeks rather than requiring an army and spending multiple quarters. And that's essentially what the company is aspiring to do. A little bit about myself. I have 2 decades of experience in Silicon Valley in engineering, product management, and product marketing. I have been fortunate enough to have pioneered some technologies in the data management space, in the machine learning and AI space. And our vision is to bring all of that learning to enterprises outside of Silicon Valley, right? And that's something very unique about us as a startup. We are squarely focused on telcos, banks, tier 1 enterprises, instead of trying to take the easy route of going to friends and family and then trying to go to the enterprise. So that's what fundamentally differentiates us as a company and as a product.
So just quickly on the startup nature of the company, have you announced funding?
Yes, we have already announced funding. We came out of stealth 2 weeks ago, and we announced our funding, we announced our customers. In fact, we have a self-serve platform which is live, so people can go live and try out our product. We also are going to host a webinar with one of our customers on supply chain next week, and specifically in medicines in COVID-19, how one data analyst, a junior data analyst with 4 to 5 years of experience, did real-time inventory optimization and fulfillment optimization for last mile logistics, right? And they did it with our product. So we're going to host that next week, and we're expecting a great audience out there on Tuesday.
That would be great. So, Darshan, I've been in the startup space for about 25, almost 30 years, venture-backed as well. And, one of the lessons that a mentor of mine once told me was that very little that we do, especially even in technology, is truly revolutionary, right? Like, it's very hard in real time to say today a revolutionary thing started or took place. Oftentimes, with the benefit of hindsight, we could look back and say, oh, that was revolutionary. Tim Berners-Lee starting the World Wide Web, hypermarkup, HTML, revolutionary. Netscape Beta 1, revolutionary. Amazon launching AWS. These are flag in the ground points that the day they happened didn't seem revolutionary. In fact, most things in our world, in technology especially, are evolutionary. They are small steps that add up. And then at some point you look at all those small steps and you say, my God, that was a revolutionary kind of change that we made. But that revolutionary change was made up of more than several smaller evolutionary changes. When I look at what you're doing here with Isma, that's what it kind of looks like to me, right? As you mentioned, for 3 decades, we have been taking baby steps, right? We find new things and we build a little and we build a little, we build a little more. And now you've got 3 years of these baby steps. But in this case, they haven't, like, as babies often do, if you have children, you know this. Those first steps are never straight, right? They kind of walk like they're drunk a little bit, And I think that's what we've seen in our data platforms, right? We try this technology, then that technology, and this technology, and that one. And over time, it's gotten better, certainly. I mean, we've made progress, but it hasn't really come together. And so, maybe you'll be lucky enough to be the person who kind of brings, or not just you, but the company will bring this all together as, building on it. But why? So the question is, why you guys, what are you doing that brings this all together in what you call a hyper-converged, sort of model?
Right. So that's a great question, Alan, and I completely agree with you. Revolutions are always revolutions in hindsight, right? When you're doing it, it's all incrementalism. But I think what is important is that Silicon Valley has gotten into this incremental behavior and people have forgotten history almost. If you tell people that 3 decades ago MapReduce existed, they won't buy it. They will say that, Google was the one who invented MapReduce. Now, they definitely did something amazing. But it was an incremental step, and there was a key insight that Google had in the early days, which allowed them to build some of these pioneering technologies, right? So for example, I was there in the telco world in 2001, and I had to build some things which were open sourced by Facebook in 2007, and which spawned the big data revolution and everything else. And yeah, when I did it, it felt I was just solving a problem for the telco world. And then hindsight, the whole industry kind of caught up to it. And the same thing goes with me at Yahoo, where I was trying to do machine learning at Yahoo. And I'm not a machine learning person by trade. The word big data didn't exist. Hadoop didn't exist. None of these things existed. And I was fortunate enough to put machine learning in production. And 14 years later, I realized that machine learning is still not going live, right? I was able to put it live, but it's not going live. So, and this is a critical aspect of data, right? One of the, especially the last decade, has been Facebook does this, Google does this, so Mr. Enterprise, you should do so, right? And we all have ridden that wave of internet companies do it, and so you should do it. One lesson I learned as I was talking to Fortune 500 CIOs outside of Silicon Valley, right? It's one thing to say Netflix can do something or Uber can do something, but can Home Depot do something? Can Lowe's do something, right? And it's pretty clear. The pandemic has clearly shown that it's fundamentally a data problem, and all the supply chains, all of those things are broken. I mean, if Amazon cannot deliver your toilet paper to you, then what hope is there?
No one can.
No one can, right?
Yep.
So what we said is, number one, there are 3 constructs which are fundamental to the data story of the last decade, which are broken. One is, there are only 18 to 20 companies in the world which can deliver data-driven impact at scale. The Facebooks of the world, the Googles of the world, all of it.
The unicorns.
The unicorns, right? Pinterest, Uber, you name it. These folks have a unique economic structure which allows them to fund that technology innovation, right? They have ads, they have e-commerce, or they have content, right? These three things subsidize the cost of data-driven innovation. And finally, no enterprise has it, right? Governments don't have those three constructs. Home Depot doesn't, Bank of America doesn't, none of them do, which is one of the irony that has bothered me since my days of Yahoo, that why is machine learning not going live in healthcare, in banking? I mean, forget about machine learning, but you go to your Bank of America account and you can't even do a search like Google search after 20 years of Google, right? Why is it that? And so we spent a lot of time thinking about the enterprise economic structure rather than just saying, hey, you should use the technology because we come from Silicon Valley. And we build that empathy for the enterprise, for telcos, for banks and everything. And what we came to conclusion is that fundamental construct is flawed. There are not enough smart data scientists who can deliver value out of data in the world, and we'll spend the next 20 years trying to train them. Instead, there are lots of data analysts who are comfortable questioning data and podding it. So why can't we make a platform where a data analyst can make data-driven products live? Number two, most people don't have a cloud native scale. Silicon Valley got drunk on scale and said everything is cloud native, everything has to be scalable and all of it. But guess what? Most people in the world do not have the Google or Facebook problem. They have the Home Depot problem, right? And that problem is 10x lower. So, and then if you look at fundamental computer science constructs, which are, as you exactly said, the revolutionary part of it, there have been 3 or 4 fundamental changes in computer science. And I believe one of them was Microsoft coming up with Windows, and they built an operating system, and essentially it got 25 years. Another one was the browser and Google. And similarly, on the enterprise side, there have been hardware disruptions happening, which allows us to build a hyperconverged data platform. But you have to question all the incremental assumptions of the past and essentially find out what worked, what didn't. And that's what we built. We built with the enterprise empathy in mind, going fundamentals of computer science from the ground up for the enterprise, right? So that's what sets us apart.
Excellent. I'm reminded of when I first launched DevOps.com, and it was almost over 7 years ago now, March of 2014. And the big argument then was that would DevOps work in what Gene Kim called the horses, right? It obviously worked at the unicorns, Google and Facebook and Twitter and Apple and all the companies, Uber, that were tech unicorns. They were doing it. They were doing continuous delivery. They were doing DevOps, and really, it was a game changer for them. It really set them apart. But many people said, that's fine for the unicorns. It won't work for the horses. It won't work for the financials. It won't work in manufacturing. It won't work in healthcare. It won't work at large enterprises. Large enterprises have too much technical debt. They have they've built up silos over 40, 50 years that are very hard to break down. And you know what? They don't need to release software 10 times a day or, 10 times a week. They're perfectly fine releasing their software and updates twice a year. And who the heck needs it anyway? Fast forward 7, 8 years later, here in the middle of COVID. If you're not doing your stuff on the cloud, if you're not sort of adopting these DevOps frameworks, if you're not, nimble enough to and undergone this digital transformation, you're having a very hard time surviving right now, right? As an enterprise, right? And it's affected a lot of enterprises. The stock market may be up as high as it ever was, but it's due primarily to like 10 different technology stocks that represent 90% of the growth because they are digitally enabled, right? And so I agree with you 100%. What the challenge is, how do you take what's good for the unicorns and make it palatable and digestible for the horses, for the enterprises, right? That aren't unicorns, but nevertheless will benefit from it. And I guess that's your mission now, right? Over with Isamar, you have to. That's the mission. You've got to take it here. What do you think are the biggest hurdles or roadblocks that you're facing as you go forward with this?
Yeah. And so first of all, that's a great observation, Alan. I completely agree with you, right? That this notion of they need to accept the behaviors and the habits of the unicorns, but they don't have to do it the way that the unicorns did, right? And I think that is the fundamental difference, which we are saying that you want to build a platform which is right for your context, aspire for the same outcome of agility and everything else. And DevOps is an interesting area because DevOps for application development has been very well thought out and well built. But even today, if you go and tell people DevOps for data, it's very difficult. And unless you solve the DevOps for data problem, you will never deliver agility to the enterprise, right? And because ML/AI is all about iterating. There's no fancy neural network which will help the enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest hurdles that we have found are essentially people who want to keep on gluing these technologies, right? So they are used to building a horse cart and we are giving them a car, right? And that is the kind of disruption that I'm thinking. It's the same kind of disruption that happened with the IBM PC when nobody was expecting a PC on everybody's desk and suddenly got a PC and it took away the notebooks and the calculators and everything. And there will be people who will say, why do I need to change? I will remain that. And the same thing happened with the iPhone when I had my investor send this yesterday where Steve Ballmer said, nobody will buy a touchscreen phone. They want the keypad. And then the rest is history, right? So I think we really have built a product which is of that nature in the early days. People have disbelief when we show them. And that's why what we focus on is outcomes. We say, okay, let's forget about technology for a moment. Let's just say that you want to solve a supply chain problem or fraud detection problem or churn prevention problem. You assign one engineer to solve that problem on top of our platform. And in 4 weeks, you will go live, right? What is that problem? What domain it is, you define, because we are not domain experts for the enterprise. But our platform will allow you to go live in a matter of 4 weeks with one junior engineer, right? And you keep on doing what you're doing. You don't need to change, right? If you feel that is acceptable, then we can go into the discussion of, okay, how do we go more mainstream into an enterprise? And our hurdles has always been just the muscle memory of, I'm going to run a horse cart and it can never go. I just need faster horses, right? And when we give them a car, there are people who understand this. And we just had a brilliant call with one of the biggest CPG manufacturers in US who reached out to us after our launch themselves, head of AI and ML. And he point blank said, I have 300 to 400 people doing this sort of data conduiting, gluing, whatever you want to call it, work. And I want them to become machine learning engineers who are business partners and delivering business impact. And your platform allows us to do that. So it's really an elevation game for data practitioners to enter into the next decade, which is all about machine learning engineering. It's not about just the movement of data, but it's about realizing value out of data for business outcomes. And that's what we are providing. And to be honest, it's a lofty goal for a startup like us, but we have done it for telcos, for banks, and everybody else. So our biggest hurdle is just convincing the people that it is possible, because most people don't even believe that, right? That's where we have found the biggest roadblock.
Excellent. Darshan, we're almost out of time. I got to touch on one more area just because it's kind of obvious. It's the white elephant in all of our discussions, which is it's not a normal time to launch a company with this COVID stuff hanging over our head, right? And normally you might do a road show. You'd be at conferences, you're speaking and so forth. Of course, we can't do that. How has that affected, helped, hurt? How are you dealing with it?
Yeah, that's a great, yeah, you're right. It's elephant in the room, but we debated a lot, and we spent a lot of time on building the product. We launched a GA quality product. I was on a show the other day and somebody asked me, so is it in alpha or beta? And I said, no, it's GA, the old school way that we used to do GA. And he was like, you're the only one. And so we spent a lot of time building that. And we felt with the successes of our customers that the path to recovery is paved with data, right? I mean, that's as simple as that. The recovery is going to be built on data, and enterprises which adopt that mindset and want to leap forward will win, and enterprises which don't won't become laggards, they'll just die in some way, right? And our platform is perfect for the enterprises who want to lead. And given the successes we had in supply chain and other use cases, we said this is the perfect time for us to launch. Yes, it's a little scary, I'll be honest with you, but we felt that our product, our market validation, and everything else lined up perfectly for us to launch right in the middle of, because this is the call of the hour, right? I mean, companies who adopt us will leapfrog, and companies who don't won't.
Excellent. Darshan, we're out of time, but you know what I didn't realize? We didn't tell anyone the website, how to get more information. Can you let them know?
Yeah, so our website is isima.io, isima.io. We have a self-serve platform which is up and running. You can go and register yourself and play around with the product. In fact, we are hosting a webinar next week if folks want to join and listen in from a junior data analyst, what they did, and the best solution on the planet, which is supply chain for medicines. They're welcome to join that too. And all the information is available either on LinkedIn, on my LinkedIn page, or on our website.
So this will probably actually, we're taping this week before. This is going to air Monday morning. And so it'll be this week that the webinar is on, right? For someone watching this, it's the week of Monday, the 24th, I believe. What day exactly is the webinar? Do you know?
It's the 25th. So it'll be one day.
25th, it's tomorrow.
It's tomorrow.
From someone watching this Monday, it's on Tuesday.
It's on Tuesday, yeah.
It's one of the things I figured out in doing these. We got to make sure we tell people the right days. So it's Tuesday, the 25th. Don't miss it. It's a webinar. They can register on the website, and it's isima.io.
Isima.io, and it'll be hosted by Ken Denman, who's on the board of Costco. So you get to talk to Ken Denman. You rarely get to. So people from, you got registrations from tier 1 names across the globe. So this is for IT leaders who want to see what supply chain analytics can do. So
fantastic. Darshan, thanks for being our guest. Best of luck with Isima. We'll be watching. Come back and tell us maybe in a couple of weeks what's going on.
Sure, will do. Thanks a lot, Alan. Thanks for making time to interview me.
It's my pleasure. All right, Darshan Rawal, CEO of Isima, here on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back with another guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
Our next interview features Daryl Ferris of Mabel. I first became aware of Mabel when their founder, Izzy Areri, stopped in our office. I think it was just before, they might have still been in stealth. It was probably 3 years ago. I've been following it since then. They're in the DevOps testing, originally kind of UX testing and UI testing. Daryl is the manager of their sales engineers or account reps, not sales per se. But anyway, Daryl also has a lifetime of experience in the tech world testing. We had a really good conversation around testing and DevOps, and he said something that I thought was pretty interesting, that DevOps is the hottest thing in testing, and testing is the hottest thing in DevOps. Let's see what he means by that. Now let's go to Daryl Ferris from Mabel.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another episode of TechStrong TV. For this episode, we're interviewing Daryl Ferris, who manages the solution architects over at Mabel. Hey Daryl, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Hi Alan, thank you for having me.
It's actually our pleasure to have you on here. Got a beautiful picture of LA there in the background. Fooled me because of the snow on the mountains. I was thinking Denver, Salt Lake City. But go figure,
Pretty high
LA.
up there.
Yeah, and I guess
mountains.
it must be. Must be. But Daryl, more importantly than the snow on LA's mountains is company you work for is Mabel. I've been familiar with it ever since, your CEO Izzy came to visit us here, believe it or not, in South Florida, right when you guys were launching. He happened to be in South Florida, and everyone's grandma or someone lives here. And so he happened to be in the neighborhood, and he stopped in, and he told me all about what Mabel was about and what he was doing. Sounded really interesting. And that, I'm going to guess that was 2, maybe 3 years ago. Yep. And so a lot has happened since then. I think people in our audience are familiar with Mabel. Maybe they've even heard the name, but they're not really familiar. Why don't we start with, tell us about Mabel, Daryl.
Sure. So Mabel is itself a end-to-end testing platform. So primarily, or at least originally, we were focused more on UI end-to-end testing, things you might use a Selenium for example. Since then, we've sort of expanded out into other features, where we added in the ability to incorporate API calls in your UI tests. So you can do, both hybrid front-end and back-end validations at the same time. So important nowadays in stateful apps. We're kind of just got off of this giant shift left push. So before you were running all of your Mabel tests in the cloud, now you can run those locally, you can run those headlessly. So really kind of fitting into a real dev workflow, I think more truly, and how folks are wanting to, interact with their app dev, sort of processes these days. I think we're fitting in much more tightly in those. Lots more integrations have come out and whatnot. So we see a lot of folks coming to Mabel, both from, a manual testing background or just one where automation does not yet exist. But we also see increasingly a number of folks who are just not really satisfied with whatever they've been using for their test automation in the past, or they're just looking for a different approach. And they like that, we are a record and playback tool. Everyone has been burned by those in the past. And I think now, much like a lot of things we see in software dev, there are a lot of old ideas that are sort of being reimagined now and actually fulfilling their promise. And so devs like Mabel because they can come in and make their test very quickly and then go back to writing, feature code, which is what they really want to be doing in the first place, not writing a bunch of UI tests. And so the manual folks, or the less code, aptitude friendly, however you want to say it, folks who don't code, they like Mabel because it's easy for them to come in and do productive stuff. And the devs like Mabel because they can come in and just do the stuff they don't really want to do, but they can do it really quickly. So it's interesting to sort of see this, this sort of melding of personas. And recently, a person I was speaking with who was using the product and evaluating it said this thing that really stuck out to me rather, is that he said, wow, Mabel has really made testing more inclusive in our team, and these varieties of different folks can come in and contribute to testing. And I think personally, that's the thing that sort of touches me most, is being able just to get all these different folks into some sort of unified platform and have them do their testing and get better observability, all of these sorts of things, and have it be pretty straightforward to implement. And so that's kind of it in a nutshell. I actually evaluated Mabel at my previous company when we were looking for new tools. And that's how I came to know Izzy as well. And I had reached out after my evaluation had ended and whatnot, and just said, gosh, it looks like you guys are just continuing to build this really amazing thing. How can I become part of that? And so that's essentially how I'm here now talking with you.
How you got here? Excellent. So what is your background in testing, Daryl, or?
Yeah, a bit. I'm from the old school where I didn't really go to college for this kind of stuff. I just kind of grew up with computers and I met someone on IRC back in the day before the internet had pictures, and he ran an internet provider and essentially gave me my big break kind of going in there. And so I was working for an ISP when small ones existed, and was maintaining servers, interacting with customers. I was in charge of billing. There were 4 employees, so we wore a lot of hats.
I remember those days.
They were great days.
They were,
I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting for all the Metcalf predictions of the internet imploding and whatnot. But
if it hasn't imploded during COVID, right, it's never going to. Right, the internet is
a really good way. This is the biggest stress test for a lot of things right now.
Absolutely, and the fact, where would we be without it? But I remember back to those days. So I lived in Long Island back then, and we had started. We didn't call it hosting. I thought I was a virtual landlord, right? As people wanted, we were doing websites on the side. It wasn't a full-time thing, but I had to store these websites, and so I moved up to I think it was a 486 4-way server. Ooh. It was a monster, and I was at a small ISP on Long Island called LINet, and you'd walk in, and the first thing you would hear were the banks of modems at a baker's rack, right? They had all those U.S. robotic modems. And I think back then to now, my God, what a difference 20 years,
I
25
can
years.
Still remember most of the AT command set for modem strings.
Exactly. Remember those days? Ay. But anyway, you bring up an interesting thing, Daryl, and it's really a kind of a microcosm of where testing is today in the DevOps world, right? So much in DevOps when we talk about shift left, and we're shifting testing left and security left and everything shifting left, what we're really doing is shifting a lot of the responsibility on the developer's shoulders because they don't have enough to do to begin with, right? And so of course you're going to make them responsible for doing testing. They want to get it done as quick as they can to go back to coding, because at the end of the day, they're coders, not necessarily testers, though they work in a DevOps environment. And so we've shifted this burden onto the shoulders of the developers. At the same time, though, it's interesting. We do this show called DevOps Unbound. It's like a bi-weekly TV series, not TV, video series. And a couple weeks ago, we had Dr. Grigory Melnick, whose PhD is in testing. He's Chief Product Officer at Tricentis. And this guy, James Bach. James Bach's a high school dropout. I don't know if you know James. He's
I am too.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So right there. So James is a high school dropout, starts doing game coding, but gets into eventually testing and becomes like the youngest testing manager ever at Apple in 1987. And since then has basically written the book on testing. So we had 2 guys from very different paths, both very successful, right? And we talked about this very issue, Daryl, which is, in addition to the developers doing testing, you have professional testers doing testing. And maybe that's the way it should be, right? And these professional testers, though, their world's changed, right? They've gone on, we live in a continuous testing world. We live in a testing world where, and I don't care whether it's UI testing or other kind of testing, we try to automate as much as we can. But I think one of the lessons we've all learned is you can't automate everything. It just doesn't work. Automate what you can so you can do what you can't automate. And maybe that is the realm of the professional tester, right? And then the other thing, Daryl, is the same way we're pushing testing left and maybe more on to developers as well as these testers. Well, from further right comes things like security testing and observability feedback loops that, require more testing, right? It's like and
we can't forget either, our customers are still here on the right too.
Yeah, and the customer's saying, I want this. And, so it's a conundrum. I think testing in DevOps has almost been a victim of its own success, if that makes sense to you, right? We're much better at testing now than I think we were before DevOps, right? Automating a lot of it, doing continuous testing, building testing into that, software delivery lifecycle kind of pipeline, having developers involved in the process, having modern testers be able to code a little bit so everything is not manual.
Yeah, and I think you see, there's so many different approaches that we've seen come out too, right? Like, I love BDD. I love Gherkin as a language of specification. I'm still not sold. It's the best idea to automate it all. That
was the consensus. Go check out that DevOps Unbound show I'm talking to you. That was the consensus there too. Gherkin's great, but it's not God sent either. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's no silver bullet to any of this, and I think that what I think that we have done a very good job of in tech is developing hypotheses for approaches, to solve these problems in different ways, and then evaluating them and see what sticks. And I think what hurts us sometimes is when we trend towards fundamentalism or zealotry in our approaches, and we get stuck in one idea and we think it's the only way that it can be done. And I just think there's such a diversity of product and there's such a diversity of clients now that I think testing isn't as cut and dry necessarily as it once was. But the flip side of that too, to kind of touch back on one of the things you were saying, I think that we're kind of in this golden age right now of testing tools because everyone has realized that this is one of the final frontiers of DevOps. Developers can push their code out and get it into as many places as they want without very much effort. That's great, but we still have the same testing bottleneck, just a different flavor of it that we've had for 20, 30 years. And it's still this, everything slows down as soon as we try to get it into customers' hands. And some of that might be nerves, some of that might be we've released some bad things in the past and we don't want to repeat those mistakes. So there's a little bit of fear in there too. But also I just think that we've evolved to develop more of an appreciation for rigor in our development processes. And, and that's why now, it's not just UI testing or unit testing and integration testing anymore. It's security, it's performance. And then there is the observability component, which I think Mabel is, very much bought into as well, because sticking to pass and fail is not the best strategy these days. There are just so many different considerations to take in. And so the more windows I think that you have into different parts of your infrastructure or different parts of your product, I just think the more information that we have to grab onto, I think the better decisions that we can make, within our particular environments that we're working in. And
agreed.
And I think,
agreed.
Yeah.
That's why I said earlier, it's almost a victim of its own success. It's definitely matured and become more, I don't know if the word's industrialized, but, hardened, right? More structured. But at the same time, there's a lot more, testing has always been synonymous with quality, hence QA, right? And when we start thinking about quality now, we think about security being an aspect of quality. And it's more than just, is there a bug or is there, something breaking? I think the other thing, quite frankly, though, Daryl, is that, there was this notion that maybe you were like a junior developer or you weren't quite really a good developer. Oh, don't worry, you'll be a tester. Right? So the testers were like, for the kids who weren't in that, or they were in the slower class or something, or they weren't quite a developer yet, you'll cut your teeth doing testing and then maybe you can aspire to be a developer. One day you'll be a real boy. Yeah, the Pinocchio thing. So, or AI in the Spielberg movie, right? But you know what? Again, I think part of what has changed in DevOps is that testers are people too, and they're damn, God darn it, people like them. And they're good enough, and go Stuart Smalley.
Smart enough.
Yeah. But it's true, right? So it's the rise of a professional testing class of people who don't aspire to be, testing as a stepping stone in their career onto a developer. I think there's definitely, that's a big part of testing and DevOps that I'm sure Mabel, is seeing, and it's probably the people you're working with.
Yeah, every day. And what's interesting is, and I think this is a fallacy too, because one of the experiences that I have, quite frequently is, this idea that manual testers are somehow less valuable because of their output, or because their lack of coding output.
Right.
And I just think that's the biggest fallacy. I always say that automation is really your safety net, and typically you find more defects when you're building the tests, necessarily when you're running them iteratively,
Right.
because it's forcing you to legitimately do manual testing while you happen to be automating. And this involves the amount of money people are paid and whatnot, literally valuing them less.
Sure.
And I think it's something that should change, because there's so much value in, the domain expertise, or, the business knowledge that testers bring. Testers remember when things go wrong in the past, and they know what to look out for. We just develop this sense of internal heuristics, and it's a beautiful thing.
Well, but it's the human element, right? I mean, no matter how much we automate and how good it is, there's a human element that is difficult, if not impossible, to duplicate with machine learning and automation. I mean, I think it's just, and I think that transcends testing, by the way. I think that's everything. And it's a lesson we need to remember as well. Wanted to bring up another subject, and that is the influence that open source has had in the testing world, right? What's your take on that?
I think open source has been invaluable in propelling testing forward. I mean, that's really, open source is like the idea generation engine for, so much of what we do in tech. Whether that's, Facebook pumping out React, for front end frameworks. Say what you want about your opinions of Facebook as a product, but boy, a whole lot of people sure do love React. And, in the open source world, of course, we have things like Selenium.
Sure.
We have new things like
Cypress.
Cypress.
Quite frankly, where would Mabel be without Selenium and
Absolutely.
some of the open source tools?
Yeah, and Selenium has been around for a very long time, and I think part of the attractiveness of something like Cypress was that Cypress was coming in and saying, all right, we want to do something similar, but we don't want to use Selenium as our base. And I thought that was very brave and also very interesting. And of course now we see Microsoft has the Playwright library, and now we have Puppeteer, and all of these other ways to drive browsers now apart from Selenium, which is interesting. And I just think, and again, it's just sort of this insight that I take from it is that all of a sudden everyone's interested in testing now. One of our other co-founders, Dan Belcher, he said this thing early on in my employment that also stuck in my head, which was like, what's the biggest thing in testing right now? And it's like, oh, it's DevOps. Well, what's the biggest thing in DevOps right now? It's testing. Yeah. And again, like you said, it's not just UI, it's not just the front end, it's all of these considerations. What can we do to not only give us a better sense of confidence in our products, but give our customers a better sense of, I remember in the old days, right, every time, a Windows update would come, fear, don't do it. And I remember working on products in the past where we wanted to release more frequently, but customers didn't like it. They were scared.
Well, because updates represented some change and some work that they were really too busy to do, right? It was kind of, if it's not broken, don't fix it kind of thing. But then, when something did break, or a backdoor or a security issue, and they get breached as a result, well, why did you do anything? And it's a conundrum for sure.
It is. I mean, well, that's the nice thing about SaaS, right? Is that you can push these updates, and unless you're launching a new feature or something, people kind of don't know, unless you tell them, unless you're publishing a change log for those sorts of things. I don't want to get off of open source too fast, because I think that there's so much there. I mean, API testing, all of these libraries that have just come out, there's the contributions of the open source world, I think, cannot be underestimated. We use a ton of open source, of course. Even at Mabel, every vendor uses a ton of open source.
Sure. I mean, it's the dominant form of software today. I mean, period. Every application is probably 80% open source components in it.
Absolutely. And I think where folks come to Mabel, though, from the open source world, is because they need support. That a vendor can give, and they need a partner to help them on their implementation. And I think where open source is great if you don't mind spending half a day in Stack Overflow or Reddit or something like that looking for experiences. But one of the nice things about having a vendor is that you're paying to have someone to point your finger at and get some help from. And so I think that's one of the benefits. But and we do see a lot of folks coming to us. I think the majority of folks come to us from, we've been trying to do this stuff with open source. We kind of have something cobbled together, but none of us really know how to maintain it, or they end up building this, giant automation framework because they're trying to test all the things and maintaining all the packages and stuff, that, compatibility issues between their actual framework becomes more work than actually building tests against their products. And I've had that happen on teams that I've worked on too, where the framework just kind of gets too big to succeed. And then we have to start peeling back. It's kind of like the telephone companies, they all come together and they split, and they come together and then they split. And I see that over and over. Yeah.
Yeah. Circle of life. Hey, Daryl, we're way over time, man. I gotta end this. I'm sorry, but it was a good conversation. Where can people get more information about Mabel?
Come to Mabel.com, MABL.com. And if anyone likes, feel free to add me on LinkedIn or find me on Twitter or anything like that. I'm happy to have conversations about just about anything tech related, and I love interacting with folks. So,
cool.
Reach out and say hi.
All right. Hey, thanks for joining us on TechStrong TV. Say hello to Izzy and the rest of the Mabel gang. Continued success, and come back and visit us.
Sure will. Thank you so much, Alan. I appreciate it.
All righty. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We're going to be right back with our next guest. Okay, for something old today, we're going to go back to TechStrong Con, and I want to show you the presentation that Nosina Fee from New Relic made. It was around serverless and empowering your team with microservices, even if they're remote. It was a great, keep in mind, this was towards the beginning of the COVID, or halfway into this COVID isolation time, and I thought it was a great presentation for the time, and it stood up well. Let's now go to Nosina Fee from New Relic from TechStrong Con.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. My name is Noshinika. I'm with a dev advocate with New Relic. And as I go through this talk, we're going to be talking about serverless today. As I go through the talk, do feel free to send in questions on chat. I will answer there while this is is a pre-recorded video. So this video is playing of the talk. Or if you have questions after the chat, feel free to grab me. I'm at Noshinika Fee on the Twitter. So, title this talk. This is called "Staying Together by Breaking Apart: Social Distancing and Serverless." This is about how we, as a team, embrace and use serverless to get good results, which work even when our team is separated. And obviously, now we're all dealing with this separation. We're getting a first-hand view of everybody's pantries and pets and their houseplant situation. But this is going to be lessons that we do carry forward into the future, however long this lasts. This is definitely going to be stuff that's important and stuff that's very helpful as we move forward. So I, with New Relic, I'm the dev advocate for the serverless team. Did you know that New Relic did serverless? Because not a lot of people do. We have some pretty great new offerings in there. This is that New Relic data that we're sort of used to seeing, super detailed. And here it is. That's for an AWS Lambda. That's seeing serverless compute activity. But so let's go ahead and talk about the actual, what we're going to talk about today. There are some difficulties to serverless. And these are challenges that we face once we go beyond the lone developer working in a garage. And the whole concept of serverless is that we're letting a vendor worry about almost every detail of our platform and only worrying about business logic, that function code that's right at the center of our application. And with that ease of use, we get into new challenges. Now, throughout this talk, for a lot of people, when they say serverless, they're thinking of serverless compute and they're thinking of AWS, they're thinking of AWS Lambda. And I'll even be guilty of that. I'll talk about Lambdas in here as serverless compute chunks or serverless functions. But the world of serverless is a lot bigger than one vendor and one product. I would imagine that everybody here has had some interaction this week with the serverless product, whether you know it or not. I think everybody here has used something like S3 or DynamoDB or another sort of stateless or very, very low function database tool. And those are all implementations of serverless. When we're thinking about serverless, we really do want to include everything that approaches the serverless ethos. Serverless is not a single technology. Serverless is a decision that we're making to say, hey, we're going to let the vendor worry about this platform stuff, and we're going to focus on vendor logic. As Yang Kui would say, we want to stay away from the arbitrary heavy lifting of creating a platform. We want to make that stuff as easy as we can on our team. So we're mainly going to talk about AWS Lambda here because at New Relic, that is where we have seen the biggest growth in the last year, and it's where we expect to see continued growth. It's also my area of expertise. Before I was at New Relic, I was with Stackery helping people deploy AWS Lambda stacks with their deployment tools. So that's my area of expertise. If you want to come yell at me at Twitter, again, it's Noshanika Fee. I'll give that tag again at the end. So feel free to educate me about Google Cloud Functions and Azure Functions and all that stuff. So what are the challenges of serverless? Let's start with the beginning and most significant, which is fragmentation. Once the platform details are left to the vendor, we can and should empower our dev teams to create services on their own. And hopefully they're creating services that replicate or improve on parts of a big monolith that we had before. The problem becomes that we have a subset then of production services that only one team of developers really understands. And where once we had this big scary monolith, now maybe we have this Tower of Babel, where everybody understands their little piece, but the ability for the team to communicate is suddenly lost. So what's a second challenge with serverless is that this, like a lot of the talking points here, are going to be things that apply to AWS in general. They're not really unique to serverless. But one of the advantages we're supposed to have with serverless is we're supposed to be able to get a microservice up, in the time it takes to eat 2 pizzas, right? Well, it's kind of a muddled reference. We're supposed to be able to get a microservice up, in a few days. And yet, when we get into permissions configuration, there just is no lightweight solution there. So something as simple as saying, hey, we want our serverless function to exist, and we want it to be able to talk to a database, well, also serverless. We want to use like a DynamoDB table. just configuring that requires a pretty complete understanding of permissions within AWS. And the only half measure is granting everybody admin, which is not something that we want to do, especially if we're anything close to production. That's basically never a good idea. I don't even do that at a hackathon. So that takes some doing to get our first things working. The process of developing a Lambda feels a lot like developing any other function code, right? We can store our code in repositories. We can do change management. We do deploys. We can do deploys to multiple environments with a little tooling. But testing is just not part of that default process. A lot of your automated test suites don't work correctly for Lambda code. A lot of those test suites will, by default, start by starting up the server that is defined in your code, which isn't there within your Lambda code. And then there's no built-in configuration right within AWS to say, you can say, hey, what kind of events do you want to send this thing? You can say, how is it triggered, and what do you want it to do when it exits? Well, okay, you can say how it's triggered. I won't say tell what to do when it exits. But there's config you can do. You can give it environment variables, but there is no spot within the AWS Lambda console to say, how do you want to test this code? And then here's a significant one, which is that a lot of messing around in AWS Lambda does come with some kind of cost impact. And the cost impact, here's the sort of standard story here. The cost impact is not significant, but the cost impact is enough that it does affect how your team process is going to work. And here's how. So somebody messes around, they set up a few things, this is a test, it results in a $30 or a $45 bill. But that bill just sort of comes out of the blue to the accounts department. So they come back and they say, well, why are we suddenly spending an extra $35 this month? And they say, well, what's it going to be next month? Is it going to be the same? Is it going to go down? What's it going to be? And your manager is often there saying, well, I don't really know, and there's some time spent trying to reconcile how much got spent on AWS this month by developers experimenting. And once those emails have gone back and forth and this is finally worked out and finally the $30 is paid, the developer has gotten a pretty clear message. Don't mess around in AWS. It results in all these administrative problems. And that's really not the message that we wanted to give. So we really need to be, this is a big challenge off the bat, because we want to let people experiment. And when we own our own hardware, it feels like their experimentation is free. When we're trying to use these cloud platforms, again, this isn't specific to serverless, but this is a general thing. We have to deal with this bill. So how do we solve these problems? The first and most important category of solutions to keep our team connected and to keep us working together is a human solution. So the first one is we have to do some documentation. And when we say documentation, it's not just general documentation. It's not documentation of everything. It's documenting the why. AWS offers great insight into what's going on technically with our stack. So we can see really easily where events are being triggered, what the relationship between resources is. Well, that one maybe takes a little doing, but that technical information about how the stack is functioning is available. But the why is, of course, not there at all. And so what you want to do when you create that documentation is you want to be 100% focused on explaining why we did it a certain way. I would really like you to try radical honesty when documenting why your stack works the way it does. When you go to write down, Susan built this and no one understands it well enough to touch it and add more features to it. Susan's left the company. That's a tough thing to write down about the documentation of a class, but it is totally key for giving others insight into why our code is working the way it's working. And that why is often a lot more helpful than endless information about the technical function of that code. So Charity Majors, who's a genius in this field, calls this, testing in production or deploying on Friday at 3 p.m. or however you want to look at it. With any of these serverless tools, and this is totally outside of AWS, this is just anywhere, you have very powerful rollback tools. And what you want to do to be able to really move forward is you need to accept that your users are going to test some of your new code changes. If you can snap your fingers and roll everyone back within a minute and a half, and there's even automated ways to do this, which we can get into, then you have to accept, okay, we're going to roll some stuff out and we're going to see how it actually performs with users. We're not going to be able to say, that users always receive this 100% bulletproof experience, because again, it's not a long-term thing. We should be able to move back very quickly. So we want to embrace some of that experimentation in order to get the velocity that it creates. So here's the big one, and it is so big, and it's something that we're all dealing with as we accept that people who are in a room with a barking dog and a bad chair and all this stuff are going to do great work. Trust is so key. What we want to do is we want to make a little bit of space in our budgets. We want to create a little bit of account security to let people do some experimentation. And while that is a little bit of a hill to get over, handling that variability and making some security steps will create so much more trust with your team that they will begin to feel like AWS or whatever cloud provider is their sandbox, is their playground where they can do whatever and see how it works. Obviously, keep track of what it's costing and then roll back as appropriate. That is going to create such a greater power of creation and adaptation within your team. You can tell I've been playing Animal Crossing a bit too much because I've got like I think I picked Animal Crossing for all the little illustrations here. So tools also do matter when we go to be able to achieve this high velocity serverless team. Tools do matter. So one of the most critical is your tooling for infrastructure as code. So any setting you're making on the AWS console, just reduce your bus factor to 1. When you go in and you click, you say, okay, I'm going to set this memory limit up to here, and then this will work. You have now just created this fail point so that when someone tries to replicate this stack, only you are the one who really knows how it works. And I've seen multiple teams where as they grow, they reach a point where they are just sitting there and writing out a doc that says, go to these 7 menus and make these 7 settings, and that's the way for this to work correctly, which is obviously something that is not going to scale super well. So within the AWS world, tools like CloudFormation are totally key. CloudFormation templates store all of the infrastructure config within your repository, which means not only do you have a shared source of truth for what that is and making it easy to replicate, but you also have a change history, so you can very easily say what changes were made. That information is, of course, available inside of AWS to see what user made what config changes, but it's not as accessible to all of your developers because they know how to read a change history and Git. So CI/CD is just as doable with releases to serverless stacks as it is to your own servers. And that means that testing is totally possible. Now, I don't say here that testing is easy because you do have to do some thinking about how you're going to connect your Lambdas up to that test environment. So let's talk through this just for a moment. There is the serverless application model, or SAM, gives you tools to run your Lambdas locally, and all well and good. That should allow us to do the testing that we need to do. But in the real world, that breaks down rather quickly because how we're going to have that compute piece talk to our other serverless pieces, how do we have it talk to our DynamoDB? Well, if it's running locally, by default, it doesn't have the ability to communicate with DynamoDB. And so, our ability to test suddenly becomes quite a bit more limited again. You can start by building up mocks to mock all of the database pieces. And now suddenly our testing has become extremely heavy to commit to. So that's not that productive a route. There are tools out there. Among them, my former partners at Stackery have some stuff to let your locally running or running in a test environment Lambda communicate up with the AWS resources in production. So that way you can just test your code and expect that the other resources are going to be where they've always been. So that's one of the several options. There are some things within serverless framework, and there's also some stuff direct from AWS. Again, talk to me in the chat if you want to go deeper into that. But testing is totally possible, and just like always, testing should absolutely be a goal. So another huge one with tooling is, first we want to create the culture that yes, it's okay that one of our users saw a not great version that got released right before we rolled back, not that big a deal. But in the tooling side, embracing canary deployments or blue-green deployments are going to be fantastically useful. So CloudFormation lets you do canary testing right out of the box, where you can say, hey, start with just 10% of my Lambdas, change them over to this new version of the code. check some CloudWatch metric automatically. And if errors or execution time starts spiking, roll back to this previous version. You can be asleep when this is happening. So those are very powerful tools. And especially because testing does have some more friction than with maybe a more established server framework. Really, really useful to use these tools. So the last thing, again, Animal Crossing references, but the last thing is planning ahead for observability. Planning ahead for observability is so key. In this example, I don't know if any of your Animal Crossing players, this little orchard looks great, but it's actually quite unusable. Once you start trying to move through it, you can't see anything because the camera's fixed. So a little bit of planning ahead for observability goes an extremely long way. So ideally, we're not trying to go in and instrument code after stuff is broken, but to think a little bit ahead about how things are working ahead of time and what we're going to really care about. So a pretty good example of that is if we're sending back a useful response to the user before our Lambda is going to exit, maybe before it hits that return statement, it'd be really nice to think about, okay, how we're instrumenting this moment to say, hey, a useful thing has been returned, because otherwise we're just looking at the total execution time of the Lambda, which may or may not be as useful. So a little plan ahead, hey, here's what we might want to see is just goes an incredibly long way for creating that cohesion between your team, for letting other people pass back and forth the same tools. So as we talk about planning ahead for observability, we absolutely should think about a tool like New Relic to make sure that we have some insight into how things are working. I think the very common complaint that we hear is about a feeling like Lambdas are a black box, or that they are, that we have this great serverless stack, it's running just fine, but we don't know exactly what's going on inside of there. And that is something that we really should be able to engineer and tool our way out of. That should not be sort of the normal experience for using serverless platforms. It's true that we don't know, the exact software implementation of our platform, but we should know how our code is running perfectly well. So New Relic and its ability to see right in the way that a Lambda is working, to be able to grab error information, even if that Lambda crashes and it isn't able to send a final request out, and our ability to trace in on the individual invocations is going to be fantastically useful as you plan for observability. Okay, folks, that's my time. Do feel to come check me out again. I'm at Noshanika Fee on Twitter. If you want to take a look at what New Relic's doing for AWS, go to newrelic.com/AWS. And we've got an ebook out. Again, I'll be in the chat, pasting in these links and other connections. And thank you so much for your time.
Okay, great stuff there from TechStrong Con. Now it's time for the news around the MediaOps neighborhoods. Let me tell you what's up on there today. Over on DevOps.com, we have what is resilience engineering? So we have chaos engineering, resilience engineering. They're related but different. Read the article, check that one out. Then we have the CMDB is dead. Long live the CMDB. I don't think we should throw any dirt on it quite yet. Then we have an article, from a replay actually, from a TechStrong TV. How Strong DM helps mParticle to secure remote access. And that's mParticle is a great story on how they're using Strong DM. Of course, is with my friends from Strong DM, and I think you'll like that one. We've done a whole series of videos. They're up on Digital Anarchist as well. And then we also have from our friends at Instana, they discover dead microservices. So can a microservice die? And will they dream? But it's a good article on something, a new feature from Instana. Over on Container Journal, we have Aqua Security reveals sophisticated container attack. It seems like every week we're hearing about a new sophisticated attack on containers, and Aqua has the latest one. We also have a preview of the next version of Kubernetes 1.19 and protecting containers against Doki malware. Again, container security is a big number these days. Over on Security Boulevard, speaking of security, exposed hacking training videos provide insight into hacking ops. And don't think that these hacking operations and hacking organizations are not as sophisticated as any enterprise in many ways. So check that out. And then also, nebulous security visibility needs 3 vantage points. Good stuff there. So that's the news here on TechStrong TV. We're going to go over now to our managing editor, Charlene O'Hanlon, who has both a preview of our webinars this week, as well as a great interview. Charlene, take it away.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at MediaOps, and I am here today with Sudhakar Ramakrishna, who is the CEO of Pulse Secure. Sudhakar, thank you so much for taking a few minutes and talking with me today. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
No, it's entirely my pleasure. I want to talk to you a little bit about the concept of zero trust, and particularly as it relates to the cloud, because I know that especially with the work from home paradigm that's kind of taking over organizations of all sizes across the country, we are seeing some issues related to cloud security and corporate security as a result of that. But so I'm interested in chatting with you about that, but I'm hoping we can kind of start by just kind of laying the groundwork, if you will, and talking about cloud security and specifically zero trust in the cloud. So what do you mean when we're talking about zero trust in the cloud? I mean, what are the things we need to think about there?
Charlene, that's a very important and pertinent question that is on top of minds of both vendors as well as customers today. I'll state it simply and then we'll expand on it. Zero trust is simply the concept of verify everyone and everything before you provide access to anything. Access could be to an application, access could be to a data center or any resource that belongs to an enterprise. That is really the concept of zero trust.
So, go ahead.
If I may elaborate further on the notion of zero trust,
mm-hmm.
The reason it became prevalent is the conventional way of building corporate networks, corporate data centers has been, we all go to a workplace that is deemed as secure, meaning anything we do inside the 4 walls of a workspace and a workplace was secure. Whereas those of us who may be traveling, working from a hotel, working from home, those entities were deemed insecure, so to speak. So therefore, security policies, security practices were different for people coming from outside the perimeter versus people who were inside the perimeter. And the notion of zero trust became relevant and prevalent because increasingly threats are emanating from inside the perimeter, less so from outside the perimeter. Some of the most high-profile threats and breaches recently came from inside the network. So that then brought zero trust front and center.
All right. So zero trust in the cloud, or when it comes to the cloud, is that any different from zero trust in on-prem IT environments? Are there any different considerations there?
Conceptually, they are the same, meaning that make sure that you authenticate and authorize everyone before you provide access. Cloud does bring about a few extra dimensions. Meaning that customers were used to building their data centers, application farms a certain way. And there is this hesitation sometimes about leveraging cloud infrastructure because it's deemed insecure. We believe the world is much more hybrid than it ever was, meaning that there is a place for cloud, there's a place for the data center. What is important is to provide zero trust policies and user experience consistently between the cloud and the data center. Because you and I as users, we should not have to care where an application is. All we need to know is that when we use it, is it safe, secure, and it enables me to be productive.
Right. Right. Okay. So obviously, the last couple of months, we've seen a huge increase in the use of cloud applications because of the work from home paradigm brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic, and it doesn't show signs of slowing down anytime soon. So, are there particular considerations that organizations really need to think about when they are, providing access to these cloud applications to their employees to be able to, let them get their work done per se, and for certain cloud applications that may not carry a very intense level of security, how do we kind of get that zero trust model to work there?
Absolutely. It is extremely important with cloud and broadly speaking in a hybrid environment that customers not only focus on the productivity, which is the point that you were making about working from home. It's all about productivity and safety of the employees. But it's equally important to have visibility into what the users are doing, how applications are behaving. Broadly speaking, that's how I would categorize as visibility. And then the additional dimension is compliance, meaning by deploying things in the cloud, by allowing access to cloud-based applications, am I enabling myself to be compliant with my corporate policies? One thing that has been a key revelation, even during the COVID times, but increasingly so over the last several years, is audit committees of companies are worrying about compliance. As applications are becoming more mobile and users are becoming more mobile, information is getting scattered. And so audit committees are taking a very significant role in compliance and governance. So when customers think about cloud-based deployments, or broadly speaking, hybrid, they should think about all three factors. And most importantly, look at consistency of how they are enabling those capabilities.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and I imagine for some companies, compliance is certainly a lesser consideration when we're talking about just getting people, working and productive when they're not in the office. But definitely, I think as time goes on, and the different compliance regulations, especially around data privacy, kind of start to rear their ugly heads, I think companies will have to kind of take a step back and take a look at their policies regarding data governance and privacy and security, and really make sure that what they're doing is providing that level of compliance that's necessary. Do you think Zero Trust kind of helps with that by kind of reining in, if you will, a lot of the data migration that otherwise might be happening?
Yes, in several dimensions. As you mentioned on compliance, there's many aspects of compliance. So without going into too much detail, it's relevant to all enterprises, but at different levels, as you pointed out. With regards to Zero Trust, it does help in each of these areas, because when you expand the notion of Zero Trust to things like user trust, application trust, device trust, and where there are still network trust, then you can see how you can implement compliance policies across those threat and trust dimensions to enable compliance, and as you put it, rein them in. The ultimate goal is to rein them in from a security, compliance, visibility standpoint, but not impair usability and user experience, because those things are absolutely paramount to productivity. I mean, if things are not simple to use, things are not simple to access, you and I are probably going to struggle to be productive. So that's a balance.
So, besides the kind of work from home model that we're all dealing with now, are there other trends happening right now that are kind of necessitating this zero trust framework and just kind of shift in mindset, if you will, towards security?
Charlene, zero trust started as a concept well before COVID-19 and the work from home requirement, as you know. What I would say is that the COVID-19 pandemic accelerated the considerations around, call it zero trust and the work from home capabilities, and the unification of the behavior and access methodologies, be it whether you're inside the perimeter or outside the perimeter. Going forward, I expect that more of the hybrid models will continue to proliferate, like we discussed.
Right.
And increasingly, zero trust will be important from an entity standpoint. When I say entity, we've all heard about the world of Internet of Things. So as they come onto the internet, zero trust principles apply to them as well, because security and compliance, visibility, they all become very relevant in that world as well. And if we thought humans having 3 to 5 devices with each one of us was a large number, the whole world of IoT brings about an order of magnitude more devices into this world. Therefore, simplicity of policy, consolidation of policy, and even-handedness, so to speak, from access, which is what zero trust delivers, is very critical. And that's where I see the world evolving to.
Okay. All right. Well, I have to say that I would agree with you 100%. I think zero trust is going to become not just an integral part of the framework, but probably the framework by which most organizations build their security policies on. So, but we are still somewhat early days in zero trust, I believe. So I think there's still a lot more to come in this space. So thanks so much for taking a couple minutes and talking with me about zero trust. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in the market in the next few months and few years regarding it.
Thank you, Charlene. It's going to be a very exciting set of trends in the marketplace. And thanks for having me.
All right. Great. Well, thank you again for joining me. And also just want to let the audience know that we have lots more coming up on TechStrong TV. So please stick around.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community: digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and I'm here with the Monday edition of the Webinars Preview. We have a number of webinars coming up this week that span the spectrum, if you will, of IT topics, including Kubernetes and DevOps and Cloud Native. So without further ado, I want to let you know about 3 that we have coming up immediately. The first one is happening Tuesday, August 25th at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It's called Attacking and Defending Cloud Native Infrastructure. This one is sponsored by WhiteSource, and it's kind of a first-person account of some of the best and worst of container and Kubernetes problems, security problems in specific that our speaker, Andrew Martin, has experienced. And he is the co-founder of a company called Control Plane. And he's going to be talking about, in addition to kind of his first person account, he's going to talk about some of the exploitable issues with containers and Kubernetes deployments and some of the lessons that he's actually learned. So totally interesting topic if you are working with containers and Kubernetes, and really who's not these days. So definitely worth checking this one out. The next webinar that I want to tell you about is called The Future of Security and Productivity in Our Newly Remote World. This one is happening Tuesday also, August 25th at 3 p.m. Eastern. This one is sponsored by JumpCloud, and Rajat Bhargava of JumpCloud and our very own Alan Schimmel are going to talk about the brave new world that we're living in now as it relates to remote work, and then some of the new and emerging standards for protecting the identities, endpoints, and data therein. So if you as an organization are grappling with a new work from home paradigm and how to secure your data and your users on the network, this is definitely one for you to check out. Again, that one is happening Tuesday, August 25th at 3 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. The last one I want to let you know about now is called Infrastructure as Code. 3 critical concepts to get security right. This one is happening August 26th. That's Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This one is sponsored by Lacework. Now, Scott Ford, who's a principal architect at Lacework, he's going to talk about what it takes to implement ideal practices into existing DevOps workflows to achieve that, everything that infrastructure as a code promises, especially as it relates to kind of that hyperspeed deployments and overall productivity. So, but security has always kind of been a bottleneck when it comes to infrastructure as code. So he is kind of walking folks through ways that you can actually enjoy the benefits of infrastructure as code as far as hyperscale efficiency while keeping your data secure. So if security is slowing down infrastructure as code and your software delivery life cycle, I firmly believe that you should take a look at this webinar and hopefully get some tips and tricks from Scott. All right, those are just 3 of the many webinars that we have coming up on both DevOps and Security Boulevard. So please check out both the sites, see what we've got coming on tap, and we also have a ton of webinars on demand also for your listening and watching enjoyment. If you want to check out our listing of webinars on either site, just go to devops.com/webinars or securityboulevard.com/webinars. Look in both the upcoming and on-demand sections. I'll be back tomorrow, Tuesday, for the Tuesday edition of the webinars preview. But until then, please hit the pages, sign up for the webinars, and stay safe.
Thanks, Charlene. Great stuff there. Now let's head things over to Mitch at the Analyst Corner. It's Mitchell Ashley, CEO, founder of Accelerated Strategies Group. And Mitchell's guest he has a commentary about making lemonades from lemons, comparing it to other times during his career where we've seen a lot of disruption and new growth come out of it. Mitchell's also replaying an interview he's done with Tracy Reagan, CEO of DeployHub and board member at CDF. So now here is Mitchell Ashley, co-founder, CEO, Accelerated Strategies Group.
Thanks for joining Analyst Corner. Mitch Ashley, CEO with Accelerated Strategies Group. Hearing some interesting numbers about economic recovery and how many businesses may not make it through the process. And I've heard all kinds of numbers. One of the ones I heard most recently was 40% of current businesses, small businesses that have been forced to close or reduce their services probably won't make it. And that's not uncommon in a downturn. I recently posted on LinkedIn a personal experience that I've had in my family about sort of this philosophy that I have. There's the old when life hands you lemons adage. My version of that is when life hands you lemons, make a lemonade factory. Because through disparity, through disruption, through all kinds of challenges, of course, you need hope, you need perseverance, tenacity, but it's also an opportunity to kind of remake things. If you've lost a job, maybe an opportunity to remake what you're going to do. Maybe the same thing, but better. So that happened in my personal life with my stepdaughter, who was an actor and had a performance canceled during the summer, and thought that was sort of not going to happen again until next year. Turns out they found a movie screenwriter who actually wrote something for Zoom. And it's something called Riddle Puzzle Plot. I've had those kind of experiences in the business world too. 9/11 or kind of pivot points for the economy, 2008, and life can throw you a lot of things, and jobs and economies can too. So I just want to share with you some examples of what I mean by build, eliminate, factory. So after 9/11, we had started a business focused on data center, storage space, ping power pipe, and leveraging that for so many applications, and companies are beginning to push their data centers offsite. It's kind of pre-cloud. And as soon as 9/11 hit, all business stopped. Everybody didn't know what was going to happen. Pretty much were holding on to their money. And for a startup company, relatively young, about a year old, that's not a great thing to do. So we're shutting down the company and giving money back to the investors, and we'll see what we're going to do next, but it won't be here. And one of the investors asked me to do a quick inventory, see if there's anything I haven't looked at yet or considered that might be interesting, worth keeping, doing something else with. It turned out one of the networked system administrators had written a Perl script that monitored an open source piece of software called Snort, looked for attacks coming into the network. And at that time, there wasn't anything that did this, but he wrote a Perl script that inserted rules into the IP tables Linux firewall and blocked those attacks. I said, that's interesting. I've not seen that. Is there anything like that around? No, I wrote this. I thought it was kind of cool, but it's just for me. That turned out to be our first and kind of flagship product. When we remade the company, we turned it into a security company and ended up with 3 products, another vulnerability management, another network access control that we sold to all branches of the federal government and to large as well as small, medium-sized businesses. And even within that story, I could tell you other places where we're heading down a path and something presented itself and we ended up going a completely different direction. But my point is, to me, that's something I hang my hat on, to know that when things are tough, especially the tougher they are, the greater the chance that you're going to find an opportunity to really rethink and remake things. It just takes a lot of tenacity and hope, and sometimes leadership when you have people that are on that journey with you. And that's certainly where we are now. Those 40% of businesses that won't reopen again, or whatever that number ends up being, if they do reopen, they may not, even of the 60%, they may not be the same kind of restaurant or retail business or manufacturing company or whatever it is. They may have redesigned their supply chain. They may completely rethought their business model, how they serve their customers, gone from take out and walk up only kinds of services, contactless curbside delivery, delivery to the home, we'll bring the dog wash to you as opposed to you come into the door, whatever it is. But you get my point, is that's an opportunity to say, well, what do people need now? And how can I fulfill that? Or how can I fulfill what they still need, but do that in a different way? So not every business is of course kind of suffering in this kind of environment where there are people and businesses that are extremely challenged. There's also businesses and people that do extremely well. They just happen to be in the place and be able to execute to deliver on a need that exists during that downturn. It certainly exists today with delivery and goods that we order online, just for example. And many others, technology companies, Zoom, et cetera. But, their time will come too. That's not always going to be this way in terms of them being the main and maybe the only winners in the short term. There's opportunity for all of us too, in which, you see this in the investment community with startup VC investment capital still being put into companies with really good ideas. I've had some on our interviews here on Analyst Corner. So there are still people who need to put money into companies and people, investments in people, and they're still looking for opportunities to do that. Now, it can get kind of fickle sometimes in the investment, the venture capital community. Probably private equity too, though I have less experience there. But those are cycles. They come and go. Ultimately, they're looking for people to invest in, not just product ideas, company ideas. So as you're faced with whatever challenge it might be a health challenge, it may be a loved one that's sick, or maybe a loved one that you lost. There is a brighter day. There is a bright side to all of this, and just as tragic and as painful as a personal loss, maybe even impact to your own health. There is a brighter day, and part of that is just looking for it and knowing that it will come, being confident that despite what might be thrown at your business or that you or a family member, even if it means that you've lost them, those memories will be with you. Memories of that business. I'm not equating the two, but the lessons and things that you take away from a business experience, that a business that's had to close down, those are valuable things in life, and may not help you make the mortgage payment today, but might help you start the next thing or get engaged in the next whatever kind of opportunity that takes you several places past or beyond or up and beyond where you were. So I encourage you to be positive and know that through kind of great adversity comes great things often for many, many people. So while you're doing that, and I will do everything I can do in my part, look for opportunities to help other people. This is the time when people need help. They need others that are either going to believe in them, mentor them, help them look for a job, connecting them with people in your network, whatever that might be. So it's not just about you or not about me individually. Good things come around to people who do good things. And I know that to help one person a day, maybe that's your mantra for a situation like this. Not a bad one for life, whether it's a tough situation or not. But I wish you the best. Keep in touch as you have been. I appreciate everybody that reaches out, and we're always interested in following that through. Some great research topics coming up. We're just launching a survey this week around the future of work and what we can learn from software developers and how that informs kind of where we're headed next. So I look forward to coming back and talking with you about that sometime around, let's say, mid to late September. Thanks again. And if you do, by the way, if you do participate in our research and you go to our website, accelst.com, it's because your voice matters. If it was just opinions, I would do opinion pieces and write that about, whatever I had a whim about writing about. But it's really taking what you say, looking at it in the larger context of what all of us are thinking, or many of us are thinking, who take that data, and really trying to understand what are the insights that we can gain when we look kind of more systemically or from a larger viewpoint. And hopefully that's of value to you as well. So your participation is vital. It's appreciated. Your voice matters in that process. And whether we know who you are or not, most of the time we don't, because it's anonymous, but we do have folks that say, I'd like to talk with someone, or feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to know more. Those are awesome. Love that too. So whether we know who you are, we don't know we'll never know who you are, that's okay. And we value your contributions to research just as much. So have a good day.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and TechStrong TV.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Well, I'm joined by Tracy Reagan, who is CEO and co-founder of Deploy Hub. Great to talk with you, Tracy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's always a privilege, really it is.
Well, the privilege is definitely mine. So I appreciate you saying that. You and I have been on a couple panels here recently, and that's more of where we've gotten to know each other. I think through some of those panels.
Yeah, those are fun, right? That's fun. I like doing them.
I do enjoy that. And you learn different things about people that way, because it usually just I don't know you. Now we're having this discussion. I'm getting all kinds of ideas and thoughts and how you feel about things, at least for an hour and a half. So it's a kind of a deep dive into the pool, and then we're back out and talking.
Yeah.
So you and I have talked a lot since, and I'm glad to be meeting with you. So for folks that don't know Deploy Hub, we're going to be talking about one of your recent announcements or release. Just give folks an idea of who Deploy Hub is. We'll go from there.
Yeah, so Deploy Hub is a configuration management and deployment solution that's specific to a microservice or cloud native architecture. There are a lot of differences between monolithic and microservices, and the starkest is the difference in the way we manage and assemble applications and release them. Our old ways don't work too well.
Mm-hmm.
And everything, when you really think about compiling, building an application and releasing an application, at the core, at the heart of it is the configuration. What source code did you use when you compile it? And then when you deploy it, it's where did you deploy it to? What were the environment variables? What are the parameters? So there's all these little pieces and parts, even in monolithic. When you go to microservices, that just explodes. It's just like there's so much stuff. You build all these little containers. All this stuff has to be put together. So it's like in the monolithic, we had a nice big puzzle and we put it together. We carefully took it from dev, test to prod. And microservices, we ripped apart the puzzle and now we're just taking one piece at a time. So it's a scaling issue. It really is a scaling issue.
Think of it like the difference between an airliner and a flock of drones. It's kind of any one of them can go. They can be synchronized and go wherever, whatever can happen. Maybe that's
exactly.
Or not.
Exactly.
What do you think is it that? What is the sort of first thing you have to get past moving from monolith kind of thinking architectures? Maybe you've been in that for a while. That's probably not unusual to implementing a microservices containerized or architecture.
So I could jump down and get really technical, but I think that the first thing to do is to think about our behaviors and our patterns. I think that we're all learning new behaviors and patterns in many different ways right now. That seems to be the theme for 2020.
In lots of ways, yeah.
Uh-huh. And so in monolithic, we have to think about, we have the luxury of time in monolithic. Time was on our side. Some companies have really achieved a process where they can do continuous deployments, meaning that a small change gets fixed, compiled, gets pushed through the CD pipeline, everything's automated, it goes out to production, that's going at a fairly fast rate. But that's not the majority of companies. The majority of companies still have the luxury of time, meaning that maybe they do a deployment once a day. That's a lot for most companies. But more than likely once a week or once a month, or even less frequent. So when we had the luxury of time, we scripted a lot. We like to say that we automate because we have a CD pipeline, but the CD pipeline calls a whole lot of scripts. It's really a big scripted process, and it's very static. So that's the first thing we have to stop.
Seems like to what you're pointing to is sort of an all or nothing mentality, right? You have to make the whole thing, do all the testing, go through the whole QA process. And I'm not saying every test in the world is run, but you're dropping the whole, code base, if you will. Well,
if you think about it, even if we did it once a day, let's just take that. Okay, if we did it once a day, a deployment, most builds, let's say, take maybe 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours for a really big company. And I know companies who have 8-hour builds, but let's just say 2 hours for a big company. That can be done in a day. Testing, depending on how thorough the change requires, if you're doing some level of functional testing. You can get testing done if at a kind of functional level, functional points based on what you know from you had a bill of material report from your build, you compared it from the last build, you saw your differences. That got passed off to the testing team. They did functional testing based on what those changes were. And this is all agile, right? Because we're thinking in terms of incremental. And then get an approval for a release. You can pretty much do that in a day, even with scripts. But can you do that 150 times in a day?
Oh, that's a huge leap. That
is the difference.
Yeah.
That, in essence, is the difference between a monolithic mindset and a microservice mindset. And we are still, I've been on this my entire career. Basically, I've been on this bandwagon of let's be unscripted, because a scripted environment is really still very static, and it's really quite still manual, and you still have somebody managing those static scripts. That can't happen anymore. We really have to let go of we have to become unscripted, and we really have to think about separating the data from the definition, and being able to scale to hundreds of releases of small components in a day, and understand what that looks like. That is the first place to start when you think about the bigger picture.
When you take away the scripts, what is the things that maybe it doesn't replace it exactly, but what are the things that now come into play? Is it more configuration driven rather than script driven, or what?
Well, I think we are going to see more tools. I mean, we've all understood the importance of job scheduling because we learned about CI, right? I mean, a lot of developers, they knew what a job scheduler was, but they never used it in their own private environments. So tools like Jenkins came along, or Hudson at the time, and said, you guys have your own job scheduler. You don't have to do this, follow this Word doc and do everything manually. Let's just let the Word doc do it for you. But that was in a very specific, development environment. That's what job scheduling is. So we have automation around workflow orchestration. Let's start thinking about other tools that we can automate. What can we automate in the process that really is really beyond what a script does for automation? And I think the community as a whole, has to start looking at that, not just one part of it, not just test automation or security scanning automation. It's got to be how do we scale to the kind of requirement that we're going to have to adjust to when we're pushing 100 changes across the pipeline in a day, or 500 changes. To really meet business agility, nothing should be static. Our production environment should be like a transformer. It shouldn't be it's going to be lots of pieces, little Lego sets, but that when it gets to production, we have to think about all of this as something that's shifting and changing at all points in time. It's sort of like one of my favorite movies. Now I can't think of the name of it. What was the movie called?
Who was in it?
I can't think of his name either.
Okay.
He played Jake. I don't know. It'll come to me.
You'll think of it.
They had these really cool images. They had these really cool images where they were doing battles, and the world was shifting constantly. Like the street would shift, and they were like transforming this. And when I saw it, it was like, that's our new production environment.
I can just imagine about 10 movies that might be actually.
Not Doctor Who. About the doctor who got in a car accident and hurt his hand.
Oh, Dr. Strange you're talking
Dr.
about.
Strange.
There you go. Sorry,
thank you. Yes, Dr. Strange. I loved all those scenes. They were beautiful because it showed a world that was constantly transforming, and nothing, we came from a Buddhist perspective, right? And nothing is really what it is. Nothing is what we see it to be. And that's what microservices is doing to our production environments. We saw this production environment as a static thing, right? This thing that hardly ever changes, and we have gatekeepers to make sure it doesn't change. Microservice says that's maybe not the best way to go about things. We should be pushing things out to get new innovation out to customers as quickly as possible.
Perfect. And those You're not going to get a lot of the benefits, right? If you apply that old paradigm to the new paradigm, new world.
And thank you for reminding me Doctor Strange was it.
Dr. Strange, great. Well,
it's a great
Benedict
movie.
Cumberbatch,
Yeah, that's right. Benedict was in there.
My family, and I have an actor in the family, and well, he's a hunky guy, I guess.
He is a hunky guy, but I really love that movie.
It's a great movie.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump to the announcement that you just recently had. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so in the in this moving from a static world to an ever-changing world, we've got our new release of Deploy Hub out. It took us some time to do it. We really backed off on it and said the tool was really, we had to have a come to Jesus moment, so to speak, and say the tool had too many mouse clicks. So we sat and looked at how we could reduce mouse clicks and how we could make this easier, because configuration management and deployments and releases is not easy. And our goal is to create a SaaS environment where you have a reverse proxy that gives you some protection, and everything you do is simple. How do we make deployment simple in a world that's ever changing? Well, I think we have a back end that simplified the moving pieces, but our front end didn't make it easy for someone to consume it. So we spent a lot of time. 9.0 came out just after 4th of July. As a result of that, we launched our Ortelius open source community. We have about 59 people in the community who want to really contribute and become I call them the map makers, because in essence, what we're doing is we're mapping microservices to the logical application and trying to keep track of those configurations as they change. So yeah, we're really excited. It's been a really good shift. We've gotten a lot of good feedback on the new release. I'm very excited about it because I can actually demo it and take a deep dive if I needed to. And before I would be like, okay, guys, I can't figure out where that particular feature is. I don't know why we have it buried. And that was the same response our customers were getting. So we're pretty excited that that's done.
Having been as an entrepreneur going through multiple companies and building products from scratch, let me describe this, and I'm wondering if it's maybe an element of what you were facing early on when, you've been around for a while, so you're not like just, launched your first version or anything, but when engineers, software developers don't know what exactly the end user needs or the best way to implement it, oftentimes they'll implement flexibility into the product, which means more ways to do the same thing, options. So, hey, it's a Swiss Army knife now. You can kind of do what you need to do. And when I've done user testing in products like that I've built, the users go, well, if you can do something one way and you can do it a second way, there must be a reason why they're different. Which way do I do it when you intended it just to be flexible? There's those kinds of too much.
Well, that's interesting that you would define that, because that's happened in the old version and that just made it more complex. So I sat down and, based on user feedback, and I basically took out anything. If we saw something that could be done in 2 or 3 different ways, we took it out and we addressed that problem. What was the reason why we had to keep trying to find a different way to do that? And the reason was because we had already made it overly complex, and just creating more options made it even more complex. So all of that came out. So I took out a lot of the complexity and the options in order to make it more streamlined. Just give me one way to do it. I don't need, I get frustrated sometimes when if I use a map and it'll have all these different options. It's like, just tell me the fastest way. Exactly. I don't want to think about it. I'm driving. Just tell me where to go.
I learned that lesson early in my career. Not that I applied it, but I learned that lesson early in my career in the banking industry when we kind of went through a design, and it was great. It handled any situation, and the smart person, experienced person in the room said, no, you're making everybody pay the penalty for the exceptions. I think that rule how you want them to do it, right? Or how
I think the 80-20 rule has always been a good rule. You solve the problem for 80% of the customers, and if you lose 20, that's okay. And if those 20 have such a complex environment, you don't really want to. You don't want to build a solution to fit that 20. We were trying to do 100% in our old version, and I really have just had the team look at the 80%, make it simple as possible, because we want it to be easy. We want people to be able to move to a microservice platform and still have the visibility of what their application looks like, even though something underneath the covers may have changed and they don't know that until it doesn't work the same in production. How do they know? We want to be able to get that kind of feedback. So the risk in microservices is reduced.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like some really good lessons from customers and from the field too, to help shape that thinking to help simplify it.
Absolutely. Our customers were really great. And I have to give them credit. They have had to, we're a startup, we're the product's new, and they've been great in terms of giving us feedback, so kudos to all of them. I appreciate them all.
That's something also you learn doing startups is people really like to help you create your product. They love to give you feedback. Sometimes it's critical, which is fine, but if you ask them for help, almost always they're happy to help and tell you what they think and understand more, help you understand more about them. It's actually one of the funnest parts of building a company, building a product.
Oh, I love doing product management. It is fun. And that's why I like open source. Mm-hmm. Because in essence, that's what open source is doing. It's saying, let's get everybody involved in solving this problem, not just us. It's not just our problem to own. It's everybody's problem to own. So let's open it up and bring everybody in. And that's why we started Ortelius. We have about 80% of the code base of Deploy Hub is in the Ortelius open source. The 20% is really just the features that truly an enterprise would need.
Enterprise, yep. That's a very common way to do it. I think a very understandable way to do it because those are some of the kind of specific to enterprise, sometimes even more demanding requirements.
Yep.
Maybe the 20% for everybody else, but it's in the 80% for the enterprise.
Yep.
Good way to think about it.
Yeah.
Just a quick question about the times we're in. You kind of referenced it before. How's the current economic? I hate to bring up the economy and COVID and all that kind of stuff. How's that changed your business at all?
Well, we have, there's a few that have slowed down on moving up from what we call a pro user all the way up to an enterprise user. Mm-hmm. So that's been kind of a bummer. I don't think that they're gone forever. I feel like they will come back. The last announcement showing our GDP, how it tanked, that is a very scary thing because, companies will start, they'll start retracting and they'll start, holding the money, tighter to their chest and not want to spend it because they don't know where that's going. And ironically, that's really a good thing for open source.
One side of the business benefits greatly, the other, okay.
Yeah. So open source and, kind of low cost point products do really well in an economy that's shrinking. When there's plenty of money, companies have less problem writing a check for $200,000. So we fit more into the open source and more of a freemium model with a consumption model. So I feel like if we just stay the course, keep doing what we're doing, that we will in the long run be fine. I really do. And the other thing is with COVID, what COVID has taught us is a new way of living. And that living does require the ability for companies to scale. Mm-hmm. And when they have these statically built environments, even if they containerized an application and they're trying to replicate one big fat container over and over and over, they're finding out that it's a very expensive way to go. Mm-hmm. So I think that a lot of companies have thought about now the cost of scaling in a monolithic kind of style, even if it is running in a Kubernetes cluster because it's one big fat container. They're starting to think about microservices more because at the beginning of the year, I was excited to get 2 or 3 discovery calls, and now I'm doing about 5 a day.
Wow.
That's
a great sign, actually.
Yeah, and these are people just, there's this kind of perception I have. Sometimes I talk to people from the neck up. Mm-hmm. Meaning they're thinking about it. They're not ready to buy, but they're thinking about the problem and how to solve it. And then there's a handful that I'm talking to them from the neck down, where it is hitting them right at the gut that they've made some mistakes and they've got to figure out how to correct them. And so I think that I'm seeing a lot of from the neck up. But I think that from the neck up, when it comes to new projects and the economy picking up, they're going to be pushing a microservice architecture.
That way. What's your philosophy about running the business during economic times like this? Not that there's a rule book or a prescription for it, but what do you tell your company? Here's our approach.
Well, we're a small company, so I don't have to be too concerned about having discussions with employees. But we've gone through something similar. I have had to take companies through something similar. We did go through the horrible recession of 2007, 2008. And in any of those cases, we have done everything we can. We didn't lay off we spent a lot of money out of our savings, but we didn't lose a single person during that time. Now, we always, during that period, I think it felt different. There was always a belief that there was nothing that was holding the economy back from kind of getting back in line. I mean, I think there was, but we got back in line pretty quick. There was a few governmental changes and things got back in shape. With COVID, it's just scary. There's a lot more uncertainty with a pandemic than there is with a financial crisis. Because there can be there's ways to correct a financial crisis, but can the government continue financing everybody to live through a pandemic? And when you see that the United States is not capable of managing a pandemic, how long we're just going to have to float with this until there's a vaccine. So I think that uncertainty is worse for the economy. And I don't know what I would be doing if I had a whole lot of people that I had to, make sure they were covered. It would be a very difficult time.
I'm kind of in the same situation where I don't have a, cast of 100 people or something that in our company that I'm running. You bring up some really good points, both about the U.S. and I think another, fundamentally, the virus is out of our control, right? I mean, we can do some response to try to reduce it, et cetera. And your point about the U.S. is well taken. The other is, yes, economies kind of move and change differently during an economic crisis across the world. In this case, I think that virus is the sort of the center of the problem. The recoveries are going to be very different, I think, based on what the U.S. has done to try to prevent or not, what other countries have done. You could have booming economies in other parts of the world where we're still struggling or vice versa.
Exactly. And to that point, in my discovery calls, I have been speaking to a lot of people in Europe and in India, and they're still kind of cranking along. You speak to the people in the U.S. and you can feel that the uncertainty is far greater than I recognize it to be in 2007.
I've had calls recently with a few folks from Mumbai who said, I can't do the call because we're moving out of the city and I'm going to wherever, and we don't have good internet access where my folks live on the, in the farm or whatever. So there's some interesting pointing out the infrastructure issues in different companies.
Yes.
If you will, we don't have ubiquitous broadband here either. I know that's
no, we don't either.
Another conversation. You and I have chatted off and on to turn the subject. Is it okay to continue topics here a little bit? Yeah. You and I have chatted off and on about women in tech and what the kinds of things that we can do to help really make it much easier, help people attain those kind of achievements in their career, and not just women, but also, of course, people of color. I mean, I've talked about Black people too. In tech, it's just not a lot of folks. Frankly, I feel pretty ashamed about what a poor job we've done it. But before I kind of castigate myself about it, I'd love to hear your story.
Yeah.
To tech.
So, I've got some years on me. I might not look like it, but I do. And when I went into technology, I was not the only woman. I went to a Star East show, and there was a woman by the name of, I think her name was Angie Jones, and she did a really fabulous presentation on women in tech. And she did it based on advertisements. So she went back and she had advertisements from Vogue and Cosmo magazine, where there were ads with women in the 50s sitting in their adorable shoes and really cute skirts, sitting at a mainframe. We think
June
about
Cleaver in front of a mainframe, right?
Basically, yeah, June Cleaver in front of a mainframe, and she showed that. She showed that how women were the computers in the beginning, and they were always in the back room. They were doing the filing and the organizing because that is what they were perceived to be doing, and so they were the ones that ones that were running the mainframes. They were the ones that were in technology. And then she showed an interesting shift sometime around the 80s. And she showed commercials from the 80s. One was a boy sitting at a TRS-80. And his little sister was standing behind him watching, not on the computer, but watching. And the dad would come in and show him a skateboard, and he nodded his head, and showed him a basketball, and he nodded his head. He showed him a football, he nodded his head. He brought in the keys to the car, and he nodded his head. So these were and then she showed things like Weird Science, the movie Weird Science, or boys are creating the perfect woman. And she showed how there was a shift in targeting and marketing computers to boys and not to girls. And so and she literally showed how in the 80s, she did research on how many men and how many women were graduating in IT at that time, and the numbers for women were way low. So something happened between 1950 and 1980. I graduated right in the 80s timeframe and went so I don't think I was impacted by that. But I believe at this point that we have now had, 40 years of a culture that has been specific to boys and marketing computers, marketing games. Even if you see games there, you hardly ever see a girl playing a computer game. It's always focused around boys. So there's problem one. We have a cultural problem with that. Number two, the other, if you go back to that point in time, how many Black families could have afforded $1,500? I don't know how much a TRS-80 was at the time, but it was not cheap.
Oh no, you're talking about $2,000 computers to get an Apple II,
yeah, exactly. So
extremely expensive.
We don't have that. And even today, we're having discussions about children needing to go to school because they don't have computers, and most of those children are Black and brown. Now, the cool thing is open source has, if people had access to computers, open source has the ability to be a platform to democratize software development. Because anybody who wants to get involved in an open source community can do so, and they don't have to have a whole lot of experience if the open source community is driven with the correct heart. I was sitting at last year at DevOps World. I went to one of their inclusive lunches, and I was sitting with maybe 2 Black men, and the rest were white women. And I asked, how many people here have contributed to an open source? They all looked at me like I was crazy to even ask the question. And a woman raised her hand, and she goes, well, I did try to commit to the Jenkins community, and nobody ever responded to my pull request.
Interesting.
Now, by that time, Jenkins has already got its good old boys club, and I hate to say it that way, but that's what happened. So open source could be a platform for us to help fix these problems, but I think that open source has created an interesting culture of its own, with committers getting, recognition and badges, and people being kind of put up on a pedestal. And that pull request from that woman who said, I'm going to try, they just didn't pay attention to, and maybe they should have. So if there's a way for open source to help democratize the education of more than just the people even coming out of college, there are plenty of people who have never went to. I mean, Bill Gates didn't finish college, So there's ways that we can fix this, but it does require us to recognize that there's a problem in the first place. And I think generally in the United States, that's our biggest issue, is we don't understand that our culture comes from a place of white supremacy. I'm not saying we're not doesn't mean we're all racist. It just means that our culture and our laws have been built by white men. They've been defined by it. And so we live that. And so
what's the whole topic of systemic, not racism, but
yes. But we all have to recognize we live in a white supremacy society, that everything we've done in the past 200 plus years is based on that. So if we can acknowledge that, then we can move forward. But if we can't acknowledge that, it's going to be hard to move forward.
Well, let me first say I contribute to the conversation as both an ally and, I've learned based on where I am in my station in life, I truly don't understand, and I can't understand myself, but I can be an ally for helping. And I've been through the same, because I graduated in early 80s myself. And that was kind of when we were getting rid of the wild things happening at parties, and, women were there as objects, not as, coworkers and all that kind of thing. But I agree with you. It totally swung to the good old boys network, is just exclude people. And we had this whole philosophy, maybe still do, of it's give everybody an even break, create an environment where people have opportunity. And my learning, at least my belief, is that's great, but if it's systemically built against a class of people from gaining and for themselves and being part of the community, giving them an opportunity to be there is just like, okay, yeah, you can commit code, but if we're going to be a good old boy network, what's the ability to commit code? So for me personally, I don't say this anyway to pat my own self on the back. The only thing I figured I could really do, at least at the time, was as I was working with people, and this was probably more with women than it was with people of color, because we're not working with as many, is if there's for example, a salary discrepancy, don't go through the let's step 2, 3, and we'll get you there. If you're 30% behind where the market is, or whatever that number is, go to market. If whatever we're paying people that have that same ability and in that same job, let's put people there and catch it up in one step. And so I think it's to your point about we have to remove some of that systemic part of our environment and not just be welcoming, if you will.
Yeah, and that's hard. I mean, do you think that the folks at Tandy realized that they were excluding women in technology because they were creating a commercial that showed the little girl standing in the back and the little boy hogging the computer, meaning that's not your toy? They probably didn't recognize that. What they were saying is dads will spend this money on the sons, but they won't spend money on the daughters. So let's market in the way that we know will sell the product. Right?
Good at science girls on or whatever, that kind of, nonsense. But
so it's it's so deep in who we are. It's so and if you're a minority, that's just doubled, right? If you just have, I have challenges being a woman. I in terms of looking for funding for Deploy Hub, we're looking at 2% of investment go to women, 2%. Wow. So I'm competing with all the women for 2% of the investment dollar, which is literally impossible. I always get, it's too early. And then I'll be on a call with a couple of guys who just got, $2 million on a white paper. Okay, so that's not too early. Mm-hmm. It's like, come on. Ridiculous. But I get it. I totally get it. And this is something that we all have to think about and want to solve. We have to have the drive and we have to want to solve it. And, and a lot of people who are already in a place of privilege, they don't want to solve it. What motivates why would they want to solve it? And that's why you have people protesting. We have come to that boiling point where we have to get loud. Mm-hmm. We have to get loud.
Yeah, I count myself as very lucky, not only because I am privileged and all of that, and I am, but my family, my stepkids, I have kind of 2 generations of kids, my first kids, and then about 7, 8 years later, a couple of stepkids who were in their mid-20s. And they think about the world very differently. And the whole systemic racism and discrimination, we have a lot of conversations that are, and also, non-binary sexuality, all kinds of things that challenge me to I don't even know how to talk about it, more or less think about it. It's been super helpful. One of the things I've really discovered in the workplace, though, is as I've worked with people coming out of college, women coming out of college, this generation is fearless when it comes to technology. There aren't tech people and non-tech people. Everybody's a tech person. And, it's like, we did a study with a focus group one time, and this person had poured cement on their back porch. And have you ever done that before? No, I'd never done it before. Well, how did you decide you could do this on your own? Well, I looked up on YouTube and I found a video and it was 3 minutes long. I figured if it was 3 minutes long, I could do it. That was how hard it is measure. So maybe some of that will also help. it will be a wave at some point of new people that are just going to think differently about it. And I'm hopeful that will be part of the solution too.
Yeah, that's sort of like at DevOps World last year, I met a woman from CloudBees, and I wish I knew her name right now. Beautiful Black woman, fairly high up in the management order of CloudBees. And she sat at a table, a different lunch that I had gone to. And somebody asked her, how did you get to where you're at? And she said, there was a point in my life that I decided to own it. And when I made the decision to own it, it made me realize that I belong at the table. I belong in the room, but I had to figure out that I had to own it first. And she said, it's hard, sometimes it's hard for people to own it because they don't have the confidence. They don't have the mentors. They don't have somebody to look up to who owned it before them. And I think that's kind of what you're saying. In the millennials, they owned it because they saw it on a YouTube video and they said, oh, I can do that. So I think that the challenge of women and the challenge of minorities is that we have to own it, and we have to step up, and we have to be loud about it. We have to remind people that that commercial is not appropriate. Don't you get that? Didn't you see that? And that it happens everywhere. I mean, I went to, and this is the last story I'll tell about this topic.
I'm happy to go as long as you want.
but it's a Microsoft story, but it truly did happen. So I went to a Microsoft partner conference, and we got a bag, and they put us all on a bus, and we got to go to their store. And it was really beautiful. That campus is gorgeous. It was a lot of fun being there, and they treated us all extremely well, all equally. It was beautiful. Until I went into the store. And I went into the store with my little coupon, which we could get anything we wanted in the store with our coupon. And I saw this really cool black t-shirt, and it just said geek on it. And I'm looking around, and I pull up the extra small men's, and it was pretty big for me. So I went over to the woman at the register, and I said, do you have this in the ladies? She goes, well, not exactly that one. We have a pink one. I was like, oh, that's even better. I'll take pink. I love pink. So she showed me where to go. I opened it up, and it didn't say geek on it. It says, I love geeks.
Ouch.
And I held it up, and I was like, I'm supposed to wear this to say I love myself? I'm not sure what this means. So later the next day, we were sitting at a dinner, and I had like 3 Microsoft execs and 2 other partners at the table. And they wanted to start conversation. They said, so what did you get at the store?
Oh, here you go. I'm so glad you asked, right?
And the guy that came, and I didn't volunteer. I just was like, the store, that was a bad experience. So I didn't volunteer. The guy next to me said, I got my daughter a t-shirt that says, I love geeks. I looked at him straight in the eye. I said, burn the freaking thing. Are you an idiot?
That's hilarious. Oh my God.
And he said, why? She loves her daddy. And I said, you don't get it, do you? And then the other guy sitting next to me on the other side looked at me, and he said, oh my God, I am so sorry. And the guy from Microsoft said, oh, that's bad, isn't it? And I was like, yeah, it was really bad. So about a month later, I got a gift in the mail. And I opened it up, and it was this really cool dark blue hoodie. In pink across it, it says geek.
Awesome.
With a note from the guy who said, I'm sorry. And he said, I ordered 500 of these, and I've sent it out to every woman in technology that I know.
That is fantastic. I mean,
isn't that a great story? And of course,
is.
I got an email from the Microsoft exec that told me we've taken them all off the shelves, and we've explained to the person who buys for our store that was not the very appropriate, clothing for our women. It was like nobody else noticed it. What the heck?
That's the whole, systemic part of it is you don't know it's there, and certainly I've been very guilty of that myself too. I know I'm sure there are many situations I don't even know about today, but at least when it was recognized and brought up, the aha moment happened. Better than that is they did something about it. Now,
they did. They corrected it.
The world's problems, but it is a step, and that's what I would add to what you said is, yes, you have to own it, as a Black person or a person of color, as a woman, I have to own it. I have to
Exactly.
own it too. And I'm not owning it in the same way, but I'm owning it to be an ally and to want to learn and make changes where I can make changes, because that's the action that I can take. I can't speak for a whole class of white males, but that I think is what the other side of it is, because then you change the system, as well as like you're talking about. Is I'm not going to let things get in my way. I'm not going to let people impressions of whatever, or their discrimination or whatever. That is not who I am. I'm this person, and this is what I'm going to do. This is where I'm going to be and how I'm going to get there. So good for you. But that's how I feel about it. I'm sure there's a lot of people that wouldn't agree with me, but
well,
I have three very strong women in my group. So there's good reason why I've gotten a little bit of progress in my thinking. Are there any good things happening? Any organizations or groups, or not that that's always the solution to it, but are there any things happening that you would point people to as this is helpful, it's a good book, or it's a good person, or anything like that?
I don't off the top of my head, but I can tell you.
I'm going to put you on the spot. Sorry about that.
No, I know, but I can tell you that I'm really proud right now of the Continuous Delivery Foundation, the CD Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
We are really, there's several women who are running it. And it's a struggle. It really is, to try to include more women in like the conferences, to encourage them to submit talks. We started something on LinkedIn, a LinkedIn group called the SheDF.
Oh, that's great.
Yes. So the SheDF, where we can encourage each other to submit for talks and to get yourself in front of people. I call it, share your she wisdom, because we need women we just need women back in the picture. And the CDF has done a pretty, they really are focused on and being as inclusive as possible. Women of color, actually being inclusive to as much as we can. The concern about the SheDF was, well, what if they're trans? It's like, well, anybody who relates to being a woman, we don't care where they started. But we're feeling super careful about it. And we have an interesting group of women who are working on it. And I'm very, very proud of them. It's so fun to be on a call and it's just women. Mm-hmm. If I'm a technical, I know there'll be one board member who shows up and he's a man and he's like, whoa, I'm overwhelmed here.
Now you know what it feels like.
Exactly. We tell them that too. It's like, now you get it. Because,
now, what's your involvement in
on the board?
Okay. Board
on
member.
The board. Yeah, and I'm very involved in the outreach. Tracy Miranda, who works for CloudBeast, she runs our open source. We've become very, very close. Even she lives in Canada. I live in New Mexico, but we're on a phone or a Zoom meeting on a regular basis. They call us the Tracy squared because we both have similar backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm having a lot of fun with it, and we're being just as proactive as possible to get more women involved. But I can tell you, it is a heavy lift because you have to find them and hang on to them and coach them and encourage them to get their faces out there.
You do. It requires effort and it requires dedication.
Mentorship.
I totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
From the men of the world, especially.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I mean about our part of the commitment. So I'm certainly no poster person for solving the issue, but I want to do everything I can to help. Anytime you want to come on and talk about that, you're always welcome. Of course, and we'll always talk about Deploy Hub and the great things that are happening at your company, and news and exciting thing there. But I'd love to kind of get some kind of a dialogue going on a semi-regular basis on topics and
that would be great. I think having a topic on getting women in technology and encouraging young girls to go into programming is really, really critical.
So if you're out there and you want to talk about this and have a dialogue about it and help people like me and others understand people of color, whatever it is, non-binary sexuality, all of those things, I think that conversation hopefully can help us move from learning to action. So,
and the good news is we're having the conversation. You're having conversations with your stepchildren that you didn't with your first set of kids.
Oh, no, not at all.
That's already
I was
a shift.
exercising every inherent bias and stereotype or whatever, I'm sure.
That is already a shift. The conversation is where it starts. That's why it's so important to start talking about it.
Well, I have a lot of people to thank. And first couple of managers I had were women, actually. So, and I have reached back to what were some of those experiences I realized I got from it, but I didn't realize it until I thought about it. It was huge, had an influence on me. So I'm trying to give back in some way. So thank you for helping me do that and for helping our audience.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. And yes, I'll come back anytime you want to talk about diversity or any of these topics, because I'm pretty passionate about it all. And if you're out there and you want to get involved in an open source, check out Ortelius. Abraham Ortelius was the first map maker. He created the first world atlas. Talk about a hard job. How would you even do that?
Problem.
He had to go all the way around every continent to do it. That's a serious surveying problem.
That's somebody had a different paradigm in mind for how he's going to go build a map, right?
He had to reimagine it, and we're reimagining how we're mapping out a cluster, and that's why we used his name.
Interesting. You wonder how many things that person did that have carried through today. We don't realize that, well, we separate the map, we lay it out this way or whatever things, because they laid the foundation for it. And maybe you're doing the same thing with
How many people do you think told him he was insane?
Well, yeah, I'm sure everyone did. Especially his family.
You're going to do what? You're going to take a boat along the coastline of every single, that's insane.
I've sure heard a lot of, that's a dumb idea. What were you thinking?
Why would you want to do that?
Exactly. Well, Tracy Reagan, it's been great. I hope people will check out Deploy Hub, the new release 9, the great things that you've done to simplify the product. I wish you the best. And fundraising or whatever it is, as well as product, and helping us all get code out to into the fabric of our environment faster.
Thank you, Mitch. It's a pleasure.
You bet.
Hiring great DevOps and cyber talent is a huge challenge for technical teams. Cloud transformation is driving demand higher. You've tried doing it yourself. Job boards, LinkedIn, didn't work. Recruiters are an option, but who do you trust and not waste your time and money? RecruitOps is the new way to source engineering talent. From MediaOps, the people behind DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal, and more. We sit right in the middle of the hottest positions in Dev, Sec, and Ops, and the brightest minds in the field. If you're looking for a great position or the talent to fill it, we can help you. Trust us, risk-free.
All right, that's going to call a wrap on today's show here for TechStrong TV for Monday, August 24th. We'll be back tomorrow with a full slate of fresh new content. Looking forward to seeing you then. Until then, this is Alan Schimmel. Be safe, be well, be strong. TechStrong. We're out.